that you confirmed open.
Okay, members, thank you. And we have a quorum, and I call the meeting now to order. I welcome all members to the meeting of the Committee for Communities this morning. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off? Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. No recordings or photographs are to be taken. May I remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices. Switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Use tablet devices discreetly and in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and please be aware of the cameras when using the tablet device, and I would also just remind everyone of the sensitivity of the microphones. So, members, moving on to item 1, apologies, we have full attendance. No, are we aware of any apologies? No apologies recorded, thank you. Item 2, members, chairperson's business. You have been provided there, members, at page 5 with a letter from Housing Rights in relation to a forthcoming visit in May to the north here by the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing. Are members content that we have a short meeting to hear from the Special Rapporteur on Tuesday, 14th of May, followed by an informal lunch? Thank you, members. Staff will provide further details closer to the date. Members, you have also...
Can I just confirm on that day, there is actually a Housing Rights meeting in the Long Gallery to celebrate their 50th birthday, which will probably coincide with that meeting.
Yes, I think that's what we've tried to coincide specifically with it. Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Then, members, at page 7, you've been provided with a letter from the Minister outlining his intention to introduce a bill on pensions, which is the extension of automatic enrolment. The Minister has offered a briefing on the bill by officials. Are members content that we receive a briefing and ask the committee team to schedule this in? Thank you, members. Agenda item 3, members, then draft minutes. I refer you to the minutes from the meeting on 21st of March, which are at page 25 of your meeting pack. Have members any comments or amends in relation to the draft minutes? No. Thank you. Are members therefore content then to agree the minutes of 21st of March as drafted? Agreed. Thank you, members. Agenda item 4, matters arising. Members, at page 35 there, you will see there's a ministerial response to the committee's queries on the LCM and pensions, special rules for end of life bill 2024. You'll recall we were querying about that. It came to us very late. The reply states that it is regrettable that the Minister was unable to give the committee advance notice of the LCM. The timing of the bill and the restoration of the executive have meant the timescales for the LCM were extremely tight. Do members have any comments or content to note that response? Yep, thank you. At page 37, members, there's a reply from Northern Ireland Football Leagues to committee queries on social return on investment. The reply states that for every £1 spent, there's a return of £23. Any comments, members, or content to note that reply?
Just to say that's quite an impressive social return investment. I'm used to seeing figures of £6-7, so for £23 it's very impressive. To congratulate them on that achievement, because it means then for every pound that government's putting in, there's £23 of in-kind or other support supporting them, so that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent figure indeed. So members content to note? Thank you. At page 38 then, members, there's a departmental reply to committee queries arising from the briefing by the Deputy Secretary of Engaged Communities Group. The reply is in relation to whether Japanese knotweed has been found at any local football club grounds and on the standard for thatched roofs, and if there can be any flexibility in relation to the 1-year period for funding. Any comments, members, or content to note that response? Kelly?
I was just going to say, the issue with I suppose we'll have to wait until the budget comes forward. The thatched roof is an issue that's coming up more strongly. I don't know whether anybody else had received communication from a thatcher to say that we now have the peaks of those thatched roofs are eroding away, causing water damage to those roofs. So we don't want to lose those sort of historical buildings. It'd be good when we get the word through. Again, there's some questions asked of HED when they were with us.
Yep. Thank you, members. Yeah, and content then to note, members. Yep. At page 41, members, then there's another reply to committee queries on correcting errors to Assembly written questions. The reply outlines the Department's process for dealing with an error which has been identified after an AQA response has issued to a member. Comments, members, or content to note?
I think that the process wasn't followed in the case that I was looking at, but perhaps now it's been raised, the department will take that on board. Yeah.
Thank you. Members content to note? Thank you. And finally, in relation to this then, members, at page 43, there's a departmental reply to our queries around the gambling legislation. The reply states the Minister has committed to updating the committee on his decision once he has fully considered his options, and I know we do have the Minister coming to our next meeting, but in the meantime, do members have any comments or any content, or are they content to note that? Content to note. Thanks, members. Moving on then to correspondence, members, and I refer you to the correspondence memo at page 46 of your meeting packs. Are members content to note all other all other correspondence as outlined on the correspondence memo there? Sian?
It's just under 5.11, the Sports Council for Northern Ireland, their annual report and accounts. I am really concerned by some of the things that are in the accounts. Whether it's the unapproved expenditure, the governance issues, and from anecdotal feedback that I've received, the lack of money getting down to that third level, those grassroots organisations, and I would be really keen to get them before the committee sooner rather than later, just to have a chat about that. We still don't know, and it's not commented upon in that fairly substantial document about why there's an interim CEO, what is the current status of their senior management team. So I'd be really keen to have them before committee if possible. I know that they are on the future work plan, but they're quite far down that list, so if possible.
Yeah, just to follow on from that, I've noticed a number of the points that Sian has rightly raised, and there's big questions in relation to value for public money that need to be addressed. I don't think it's appropriate just to note this. I think we need to be pressing the Minister as to what actions have been taken on his part. I know there's 19 listed suggested actions, which 9 have been achieved, and also that there's a much more positive note, although with caution, from the NAAO. But I do think, as rightly proposed or suggested, that we need to be looking at this now. I think there's bigger problems here, and the report in itself, actually, to be honest, is very vague.
Okay, Kelly?
Can I just say that in the memorandum, there's a couple there, postcode lottery, whether or not we wish to have a briefing on the issue. I think in advance of the Minister updating us on the next version of the gambling licence, and we do need to hear from this group. Because of the funding that they provide to local community organisations. NICFA, I thought we already had on our list. I was surprised that we hadn't seen them, but when we're talking to the community
briefing as well,
and then there was another one, NICMA. I'm not 100% certain if that's for us or if that would be for education, because just childcare in early years, not full day education.
There is a significant crossover into communities as well. I think, given the pressure that's out there on childcare, I think it would be useful to hear from them as well. Yeah. Brian?
On a separate topic, just on the Equality Commission letter relating to employment law, 5.8. Just certainly, yes, happy to have a briefing from departmental officials on that. I would say ultimately it is for the Minister, the Executive and the Assembly to decide on any legislative programme, and including any changes to domestic law flowing from any changes in EU directives and enhancements for local workers. So certainly we'll take the Equality Commission's views into account, but it's not the only perspective on this. And in terms of the actual legal requirements under the new arrangements, Northern Ireland and the UK already has world-leading employment protections, and the Assembly has already voted on a motion calling on the Minister for the Economy to go even further on a range of issues affecting workers and working families, and that's where the focus should be. But happy to receive the briefing.
Yeah, okay, thanks Brian. Daniel?
Yeah, just a further point as well, page 179 at the Construction Employers Federation press release condemning the current housing policy and crisis. Our major issue, and I think we need to be asking the Minister what has been done in relation to that.
Yep.
And more so, Chair, does he agree with some of the concerns outlined in the press release released on Monday the 8th of April from the Construction Employers Federation? Because there's some,
and we do have the Minister, have the Minister next week, so there's a couple of items there that we have indicated. Brian, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think we should also just comment on 5.10 regarding Victoria Square apartments, just to welcome that the Minister has actually stepped forward now and agreed that he and his department will take the lead on this important matter. And unfortunately there was a degree of confusion over which department would be leading which minister, so it's welcome that the Minister has agreed that he will take the lead on this matter and will seek to address the concerns that have been raised extensively in the media.
Yeah, and it will be interesting to hear how he's progressing on that as well.
I was going to say, if we could write to the Minister to ask that next week he provides an update on what he's actually doing, because although we've heard what he's intending to do, it was supposed to be at pace. So I know that some of us have received correspondence from residents saying, well, what he is doing about it. The Minister has said what's happening, and so far this committee doesn't have.
Given time will inevitably be tight next week, that might be a way to front load a piece of that current very topical issue. Sean?
Apologies, Chair, just about 5.13, 5.13, the Northern Ireland Poverty and Income Inequality Report. I don't think we need to labour too much just how absolutely horrendous some of those statistics are, and the fact that we are still the only region of these isles without an anti-poverty strategy, and the fact that we keep being put on the long finger about when that anti-poverty strategy is due to be put before this committee and put before the Assembly. Yeah,
I'm really hoping to hear from the Minister more detail on that. That Absolutely. Is a significant issue. A number of significant reports over the past couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Clerk, are you content there that you have the detail on that? We are going to hear from Postcode Lottery, NICVA and NICMA, and the Sports Council one then, the report, the Sport NI. Mm-hmm. Sport NI.
And all of those.
Yeah. Okay, thank you members for that. We'll action all of those. Before we go into the briefing sessions today, members, I just wanted to suggest that I propose from next week onwards we'll move the correspondence slot back towards the end of the meeting, because I'm very conscious we have large numbers of witnesses waiting at this point, so it'll give us a chance to maybe get to the witnesses a wee bit quicker. So if members are content, we'll move that to a later spot on the agenda next week.
Agreed.
From next week on. Yeah, thank you. Members content with that, thank you. Members, then, before we go into the sessions, you'll note from the agenda we are scheduled to receive 5 significant briefings today. I will be managing the time as best I can and seeking to any questions. Possibly we could look for follow-up questions following the briefing sessions in writing and receive answers back in writing. So we'd ask members to be conscious of that, and maybe at the end we can pull together a few questions. I'm also conscious a lot of the groups overlap with each other, and indeed there's a lot of synergy in the issues that they're raising. So rather than asking all of the groups all of the questions, if we can sort of try to combine those in a way, and maybe at the end we can wrap up with some questions so members can bear that in mind as another opportunity. So thank you for that, members. I will go then to our first significant briefing this morning, which is from the Neighbourhood Renewal Forum. So members, a copy of the briefing paper from the Neighbourhood Renewal Forum is available in your pack there at page 185. I would now like to welcome the following representatives of the forum to today's meeting. So I have here Mr. Charles Lamberton, who is Strategy Manager with Triax, Shauna Boyle, NR Coordinator with Crumlin, Ardoyne, Stevie Johnson from Neighbourhood Renewal Coordinator in Inner East Belfast, Raymond Jackson, who is CEO of Confederation of Community Groups Newry, and Alison Wallace, who is with Waterside Neighbourhood Partnership. So you're all very welcome to this morning's meeting, members, and I would like to go back to yourself, Alison, and maybe ask you to make a brief opening statement, as I want to maximise the time available for questions and answers. And indeed, I want to acknowledge a very good briefing paper sent through to us. I thought the issues were really well set out there. So we have that in front of us.
Okay, thank you very much. As you said, my name is Alison Wallace. I'm the Strategy Manager of Waterside Neighbourhood Renewal Partnership in Londonderry, and I'm here representing the 36th Neighbourhood Renewal Partnership Forum. Just a wee bit of background background about the forum just before I get into the paper. The 36 Neighbourhood Renewal Partnerships came together about 2 years ago, so we could constructively engage with the department around the review of the People in Place strategy, and we have been doing that for the past 2 years. And during those conversations, I suppose the big issue that has come up is the sustainability of the Neighbourhood Renewal funded groups and the sector at large. And one of the main issues in relation to the sustainability of the sector is the retention and the recruitment of staff. And that is a really pressing issue now for all the Neighbourhood Renewal funded groups and, as I said, the wider sector. So it is, and that's really down to the pay and the terms and conditions. You can see from our paper that there has been no real increase in funding supplied to Neighbourhood Renewal funded groups in terms of salaries really from 2009. The community sector are kind of, all their salaries are benchmarked against the NJC scales, but currently all the Neighbourhood Renewal funded groups are at the 2009 neighbourhood or NJC scales, and you can see on the graphs on the paper on pages 3 and 4 that has really widened the gap in terms of what community sector should be paid and what they are currently getting. On average, if the gap is not narrowed, there's going to be a minus 30% in terms of salaries for most of the Neighbourhood Renewal funded staff and other staff within the sector. And that is really having a negative impact on terms of retention and recruitment of staff. If we take the Waterside Neighbourhood Partnership as an example, there's 7 funded groups within the area. All 7 of those groups have lost staff this particular year. And we're talking to fill those gaps, it's taken between 3 months and 1 full year in some cases to fill that gap. And that is really having an impact in terms of service delivery on the ground. Again, as an example, one of our areas, Clooney Estate, it was without a community worker for 1 full year. And that really had an impact in terms of service delivery. Last summer, they had a nightmare in terms of bonfire management. They usually do all the work in terms of bonfire management, and they had an absolute nightmare because there was no staff on the ground. The alcohol use, the drug use, the antisocial behaviour. In fact, it was so bad, and they end up then, unfortunately, a paramilitary organisation, the UDA, had to step in and sort the issue out, and we certainly do not want that happening. And that's what's happening. Because these gaps in staffing aren't being filled, they're being filled by someone else, and we don't want that in our communities. So we really have to address this issue in terms of terms and conditions and pay inequalities. So it is as well. And it's also for the staff that's willing to stay with us, the dedicated staff, it's really causing them financial hardship. Again, as an example, my financial administrator is now currently on the minimum wage. She has had to take a second job. So she has, as a carer, weekends and evenings to make up so she can afford the rising cost of living. She's a single mother, and what she's getting paid as a financial administrator, a minimum wage, she can't make ends meet, so she's had to take on a second job. And these are the people that we're going to lose if we don't address this issue. So it is. And what is happening as well, it's causing a real disparity in pay between different organisations who have different funders. Neighbourhood Renewal funded staff are on these low wages, but organisations like the Lottery, IFI and others are paying higher wages. So we have ridiculous situations now where managers are getting paid less staff that they're managing. So how can we succession plan if we can't get people to step up? Why would anyone step up into a job when they're going to get paid less? It's a ridiculous situation. And what has also happened, which is causing huge disparities as well within our own organisation, is some organisations are able to maybe subsidise salaries a wee bit so they can retain staff. And organisations are being forced to do this, to subsidise staff. And that's meaning smaller organisations that can't subsidise staff, they are really, really struggling. And those are the small organisations that are really making the difference on the ground. So it is, and even for the organisations that are able to offer subsidies, it's causing them real financial difficulties as well. And what is happening, and what that is meaning, is the community sector is having to subsidise as a statutory or a government initiative. So they do. It's costing organisations to deliver a government initiative now at the moment, which is absolutely ridiculous. So as you can see in our paper, we've put forward a couple of proposals, a long-term proposal and short term. In the long term, we would like salaries to be benchmarked against the NJC scales. That process did begin under the previous Minister, Minister Hargey, so we would ask that that could be maybe picked up again and looked at. We have also put together 3 short-term options. You can see our preferred option is the option 2, so it is, and we've also put into the paper the issue of the real living wage, and instead of the minimum wage, we would like to see people paid the real living wage in line with the Department of Economy suggestion. So look, just to finish, like we as organisations, we really want to work constructively with the Department for Communities and other departments in terms of delivering programmes to tackle deprivation. But that work is being put under real pressure because we can't retain and recruit staff. And that is really having a negative impact in terms of the services we're able to deliver at the moment. Does anybody want to add anything? That's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. I have to say I am appalled to hear it described as a paramilitary organisation stepping in. There is and should be no role at all. But I do also understand that there is a direct correlation between allowing some of these, and I've seen it in my own constituency. I've seen the tremendously good work that Neighbourhood Renewal Forum's done, in particular the new community hub at Thomas Clark's in the Lisnahull estate. But I also see the impact of reduction in youth services, and you see that very quickly on the streets and in justice and in pre-justice measures. And I mean, we do need to invest appropriately in these areas and maintain the services. I know the issue around statutory versus voluntary and community is an issue across many different areas, and that's also one that does need to be tackled. People should be working on an equal basis. We should be trying to ensure that people have well-paid, secure, good jobs, and that's as important and more important maybe in the community sector as anywhere else. So I think that's something that we do need to absolutely have a focus on, and I welcome the presentation, the question and answer here today in that context. So I'm going to go first of all to our Deputy Chair, Ciara Ferguson. Go ahead, Ciara.
Okay, thank you. And can I just first note and have on the record, obviously I was a previous Neighbourhood Renewal chairperson of the Outer North and Derry. So first of all, thank you, very much appreciate you coming here today, and I'm very much aware since 2009 where there has been basically a freeze on Neighbourhood Renewal staff who provide a critical role, not only just in the neighbourhoods but in working collaboratively with government departments, not just communities but the Department of Health, Department of Justice, etc. And then likewise, I think the real impact and government departments seen how crucial and paramount the CMV sector is, particularly during COVID, where you were left on the ground where we were the ground, and we've seen that excellent collaborative working, that trust, that the relationship building between departments, and that shouldn't be lost. And I believe that the value of the sector was finally recognised across government departments, and that should continue. So likewise, I also appreciate with regards to staff how serious that is, a real serious issue 12-13 years later, and you have staff currently, you have staff that have been there 20 years are now getting paid the same as those on the minimum wage. That's what's happened here, and then the loss of staff. So it's critical that we must bolster and support the community and voluntary sector, and particularly those areas most in need. The 26 neighbourhood renewal areas need that investment. So and we should encourage the Minister to continue the review after 11-12 years, where finally the sector was there was some light, and that's all it was, a bit of light of a recognition regarding salaries and wages. If we don't have the people on the ground, things will only get worse, and you've highlighted some of that, and I've seen that experience myself in the likes of the Outer North area in Derry, where you do have paramilitaries then coming into neighbourhoods and communities if you don't have people on the ground, and the communities can, and I've seen how communities have collectively together been able to tackle it. Many years ago we've seen, and people will know, even within Derry, the bonfires down in Gaia at the time and the riots, etc. The community got together, they worked hard on the ground with all the other agencies, and it was transformed, the work they can do, but that can slip if we don't continue to invest. So I want to thank you for coming along here today. I fully understand and appreciate that we need immediate intervention here by the department to safeguard and secure the community and voluntary sector, particularly in our neighbourhood renewal areas. So I would fully much support the recommendations that you've put forward here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Daniel?
Thank you, Chair. You're very welcome to the committee, and thank you for that presentation. I have looked over quite a lot of the information you provided. It is shocking and it is ridiculous that you find yourselves in this situation 13 years on, where people are worse off. The role that you play is hugely vital. I'm appalled at any time when I hear that there's been an intervention of any sort by paramilitaries, which is quite hypocritical given their criminality and thuggery and bullying in communities. And there's no place, there never has been and there never will be a place for those individuals in our community and in our society. But where there's a void, unfortunately, these individuals seem to get in. And that is why the work that you do needs to be sufficiently and appropriately funded. It is absolutely ridiculous how community and voluntary organisations have been mistreated by this place. It's symptomatic, actually, of how you've been taken for granted and the consequences of that and the cost to our society of that in the long term. So in terms of wages in itself, you mentioned a figure of 30%, which is deeply worrying as well. I noticed in there that you've said that some of your managers are paid less than the staff that you manage, which is absolutely unbelievable. What response are you getting from the department for communities when this is raised with them and the concerns are continually raised with them? This isn't just a symptom, by the way, of the collapse of these institutions over 2 consecutive periods. This predates that as well. So what discussions have happened in relation to that? And further to that question, in terms of the real living wage, which, given inflation and the challenges of the cost of living, are any of your staff on the real living wage? So that's the 2 questions, Chair. Thank you.
Well, there are some of the staff. Recently, getting into this year, they've been told that we're waiting on the budget. I mean, we understand that. We understand how government works, and we've been working constructively with the department. I suppose your key question is what's response. I mean, we have been getting a good response. We've met actually in advance of the place coming back up there earlier in the year. We met with the head of civil service. We've met with permanent secretary. We've met with the deputy permanent secretary. And what we would say is that we believe we have an ear. We believe that they're listening and they're trying to work constructively with us. But there are constraints and we're waiting on the budget. But we think that we've got to a stage where we do have to sort of go a wee bit more public. And it's not easy for ourselves, because we're working in communities where there is high levels of deprivation and poverty, and we are paid, we're doing a job and we're thankful for it. But we're employing people and we're managing people who are struggling and really struggling, and we see it. Staff in the organisations connected to ourselves, we wrote back to the department last week and asked about the increase in the living wage, and so we got the same response. We believe we'll get it, but I mean that's only bringing people to the living wage. The living wage should be a starter. It shouldn't be a goal. I mean, people who are doing a 40-hour week shouldn't be on the real living wage. I mean, it should be a lot more than that. I mean, to keep people living. I mean, Stevie has done a lot of work on that.
On the kind of specifics of the real living wage. So the real living wage is a commitment that was made by government here to the government employees and anybody who worked in a government building, and anybody who had government subcontracts would get the real living wage, which is calculated on the cost of a basket of goods is currently £12 per hour. So if you took a 37.5 hour week, that would be £23,400 per year. Now in the paper you talk about people earn here 21,000, which is like less than the real living wage at the moment. So you can start to see the gap in that. And obviously organisations are trying to make up the difference, and we're going out there and we're doing our best to be entrepreneurial, to do what we can. But effectively what we're ending up now doing is getting money from charitable trusts, from the work that people do on the ground through social enterprise, to raising money from the community to actually subsidise a government programme. So it's kind of things like are actually ended up in reverse, where we are now having to raise money to subsidise what is effective, what was a government programme from the outset, Neighbourhood Renewal.
Just to follow on from that, sorry, just what Stevie's saying there, folks, my organisation is exactly the same as that. In fact, we do pay NJC scales, and so we've taken that commitment for community development in our local area. However, we have to use our reserves to do that. And I was saying, yes, I was speaking to Charles earlier, we'll have to pay £10,000 this year alone towards neighbourhood renewal commitments from the Confederation of Community Groups, you know. So, and that's taken out of our reserves, which we shouldn't be doing that to subsidise a government-funded scheme.
Absolutely. And Chair, just to supplement that very briefly, just to be clear, and we're saying this on firm public record, the job that you do saves the public purse a huge amount of money in supporting vulnerable people in our communities and our societies and preventing young people getting involved in drugs or criminality or other aspects of it. And it's high time that the department noted that at the highest possible level of their agenda. It is absolutely ridiculous that you're in this situation, and I respect and appreciate, as Charles has pointed out, you have the ear of people at the senior level in the department. Having an ear and taking action is two different points, and it's very important that the department take action. And maybe it's the reason why there's such high levels, Chair, of vacancies within this particular department, if this is how people are treated or mistreated. But certainly you have the ear of this committee, and I know the Chair and colleagues around this table will be advocating on your behalf, because we all recognise, particularly in the difficult society that we have and the challenges that are unique to some of our communities, the important role that you play, and certainly you have our support in the work you do and going forward. So thank you very much for being here.
You, Daniel, Chair, a brief point on that, just.
I just wanted to reiterate, and just from even in the back of Stevie, I think it's pertinent also maybe to highlight in the fact of programme costs is zero. So programme costs is cut. So then the only thing you have left is your staff, who are the ones who go out and seek with other government departments, with other funders, philanthropists, the actual programme money, they actually deliver the programmes on the ground. So could you just, when you get a chance, just enlighten us on that as well?
I was talking to Heather from Willowfield, who's one of the groups who did amazing work over in East Belfast, just before we came in there. She was saying, like, they used to have 16 staff, but recently, because they've tried to keep the NJC scales, they just can't keep on dealing with kind of the cuts that have been coming. So now they had 16 staff, now they've got 9 staff, but their wage bill's still exactly the same as it was when we were 16. So you can see the kind of the scale, like that's almost like 50% of their stuff they've had to lose by trying to keep up with the NJC scales. Now that has a direct impact on preventative work. You can't go out there and do the work with young people. I know at Heather's organisation are desperate for a youth worker to try and do that preventative work, particularly coming into times of years like this, where there is the danger of people, you know, getting into things that they really shouldn't be because there isn't the preventative services around them. So yeah, it's a day and daily experience for everybody. And at our neighbourhood renewal, we were looking at kind of our own action plan last month, and the main thing that came up was saying that with the steady withdrawal of government services, that we're being asked to step in to do things. And you know what? We just can't keep doing that. Mm-hmm. Like, we really are completely stretched to as far as we can go now.
Ellie.
Thank you very much. Having worked myself in the community and voluntary sector for 16 years before I come up to this house, it sickens the life out of me that this is still the same crack going on way back whenever I was there. 15 years behind in pay scales, that's disgraceful. So can I just ask a few very technical questions, because we obviously as a committee can then go in and scrutinise the department. What was the department's response whenever your options were raised with them? Have they responded at all?
We haven't had a response. The response is that they're written in their budget. We met with the Deputy Permanent Secretary, and following that meeting we supplied literally this paper and but updated to yourselves. So we haven't had a response, or we're awaiting a response, obviously, in due course at the time of the budget.
So that has been put forward.
Yes,
they should be including that as part of the budget planning process.
Yep.
Okay. Can you explain for me, in 2021 when I sat in this committee before, the then Minister had confirmed that community and voluntary sector posts that were funded directly by the Department for Communities were to receive the real living wage and living wage. Has that come forward? But importantly, the funded directly by communities. Is it a case that they give you the money and you decide how it's spent, or do they actually give you, this is the salary, this is the position? But do they say this is the position, this is how much it's worth? So they're actually currently going against what the Minister's direction was in 2021 then?
Well, there's two things happened then. There was a real living wage, but there was also a non-consolidated one-off payment, and there was a 2% increase. And we were told that the 2% increase would roll on when the Assembly came down. And we've made this point very clear to officials. Unfortunately, that was the first thing to go.
So the Minister had said, but there was a commitment to
and
that.
That 2% didn't come.
Matter.
And the 2 years when the Assembly was down.
And then can I just ask, I'd looked up the codes of practice that you guys are working under, is that still the DSD paper from 2012, or has that been updated since then?
Updated.
Okay, there's another thing that we can hit the department with.
They under the review of people in place that might be looked at, but no, that hasn't been updated.
So we were working under 2012 codes of practice that were written by the department 15 years ago, the amount of money for salaries, and even though the Minister had said about the living wage payments being made from 2021 to all directly funded posts by communities, that's not being honoured. Okay, I think we've a lot to ask the department about. Thank you.
In terms of budgets as well, it's not just salaries that haven't increased. We haven't got any increase for running costs from 2009 as well,
It's dropped out.
which has been a real nightmare for groups as well. You can imagine how much electricity costs have went up on alone in since 2009, and we're having to subsidise that as well. Because I was even saying, this month I've had to go and get quotes for insurance. Our insurance have went up £700 in 1 year. In fact, they've doubled since 2019, but we've got no uplift from the department in terms of running costs either.
But in the contracts, they will still require you to have the same level in protection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We still have to do the same thing. Yeah, of course.
100%.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Brian, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I think it's in my register of interest just to declare that I'm a director of the Greater Shankill Partnership, and similar to Kelly, I worked for many years in community development, for 20 years recently in part of Belfast, and currently I work with all the Neighbourhood Renewal partnerships in North Belfast, supporting them, Manus and colleagues, and certainly this is vital work. This is not some sort of optional extra in society. This is vital work, particularly in disadvantaged communities which are vulnerable to exploitation. And I'm sure all MLAs will be involved in supporting community development, capacity building in various neighbourhoods and communities. And we'll all recognise that where those local groups don't exist, our work is much more difficult in trying to address the difficulties that arise. So it is a vital partnership for government, working with the voluntary community sector and for elected representatives. I raised this particular issue on debate in the Assembly here on Tuesday, where we had a debate on the spring estimates, the last financial quarter from the Department of Finance. It was a retrospective debate, but I highlighted speaking with some neighbourhood renewal partnerships regarding the freezing of funding contracts, and I know there's this ongoing review of the people in place strategy, through which contracts have just been rolled over, but no increase, no staff, and just no job certainty for staff, and it's like a stagnation from the department, which is hampering the work that you're all involved in, and it needs to be moved forward. I think it was the 27th of March before your current funding was renewed, with a few days to go.
3 months.
And you'll only be given 3 months and awaiting a departmental budget to be confirmed. So again, there's no certainty for staff, and I see from my own experience how staff move on, don't stay, and can get a better salary elsewhere. And your paper is very helpful. You've set out the real term decline in the salary, where it's literally been frozen, and how the value of that has gone down. So this is very helpful for us, and certainly we'll be raising this with the Minister. And just to comment too, not only is it demoralising for staff, but also for management committees, and that's why it's the voluntary sector, because the management committees are all there in a voluntary capacity, trying to create positive change in areas, and it doesn't help then attract people. And as I said earlier, in those areas where you don't have that, people willing to come forward, the community then suffers, and you can't bring about the positive change that we want to see happening. I do remember that at a time when the salaries were linked to NJC scale, so that is a quite appropriate request, and that's helpful that you've said that your whole paper is very helpful, and it's concise and it's clear. Sometimes you can get too much information, so the length of your paper is appropriate. So, as I say, we will take this forward, and thank you for setting the picture out clearly for us.
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you, Brian. And going then to Morris.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. I suppose, from my point of view, each and every one of us around this table is well aware of the neighbourhood renewal team within their own constituency, and in my constituency, the work that's been done in Ballysally and Melbourne and West Ban. I have lived there all my life, and I can see the difference that neighbourhood renewal has made in those 3 areas. So therefore, I would be keen to see it continue. My worry is that the 30% reduction in wages over the period of time is not sustainable, and I don't know how you do it, but it's dedication. Well, it's not, you're not in it for the money. The other point is I find that some of the statutory organisations are trying to duplicate what you're doing rather than be enablers. Statutory organisations should be enablers to provide the funding and the help for you to do the work that you need to do in your specific area. And let's not forget, neighbourhood renewal, it's custom planning for a specific area. And I think one of the ways that we can eradicate the paramilitary groups within our communities is to encourage young people to go out, to be educated and to learn skill sets. So therefore I'd like to see something developed with the local colleges, especially the NRCs, and get skill sets taught to young people that they can then go out and earn a living and increase their own economy within their own area. So look, from my point of view, I see firsthand, and I would like to thank you very much for everything you have done, not just in my area, but across Northern Ireland. And yep, I don't think there's anybody around this table doesn't support what you put in this paper, especially option 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Morris. Moilisa, go right at all.
That's Rovalig and Sean Hughes. You're all very welcome here today as well. And I'm, again too, as an ex-councillor, very well aware of a lot of the great work that is carried out, say, within the many community organisations we had to come under the umbrella of neighbourhood renewal and the likes of it. And I just want to express my own support for everything it is that you do. And in particular, when we reflect to just even on capacity building, and in terms of, we'll say, within communities, and how it is that I know that even community groups in my own area, which is very rural, Castlederg, probably one of the most rural areas like in our whole constituency, and yet and all the influence that has been there, we'll say, with the development of capacity to our own community groups in that area as well too. And people have alluded quite often, or quite regularly here, to the whole idea that if there's a gap left there, it all is filled by paramilitaries and the likes of it. And we all know just how frightening that is for communities, and that's for everyone, we'll say, within communities. And I reflect just on the wages, and then it is that is paid to the people who are within your organisations, and how it is that there's been such a backlog, say, in terms of wages. And I'd have thought at the very least that you have that 2% per year that is back pay that you are all entitled to as well too, and that I'd like to think that we can confront the Minister, will say, on that, and hope to bring that to fruition. But again, relating then to that gap that's been filled by paramilitaries, in fact it is you that are there at the cold face that is dealing with a lot of that are totally and absolutely underpaid, that have less wages than maybe many of the people it is that you're actually providing services and that too, in every respect. And I reflect on a post that used to be in another institution that I worked on, and that poster actually showed a gorilla, and it stated something like, if you think education's dear, try ignorance for a change. And I think the same thing applies with community renewal as well too, that if you think that it's expensive at the present time to provide the services that you provide, do without it for a while, and we'll just see how costly it is then for everybody. So I wish you all the best in your endeavours, and to continue the good work that you have been doing today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Sean.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, obviously in the same boat as other people here, having worked in the community voluntary sector and also as a councillor, like Militia, Stevie, with yourself in East Belfast, you know, seeing the amazing work that was being done by yourselves and by committed members of staff. But I think the point I want to make is, first of all, that it shouldn't be a vocation to work in the community voluntary sector. You shouldn't have to suffer to actually want to do a job that changes people's lives, and they should be remunerated on a fair basis. I'm horrified that it's 2009 scales, and the 2009 running costs, having been in the charity community voluntary sector, knowing the difference in running costs from 3 years ago, let alone 13. One of the questions my colleague Kelly had brought up, that you're still working under a code of practice from the DSD in 2012. In 8.1 of that, it was that a development office official should sit on each partnership as a non-voting member and be a conduit between the partnership and government. Is that happening?
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
They do sit in our partnership boards. Yeah.
They know all about it.
So they are aware.
Why?
There's more than one.
Yeah.
And in fairness, the people that do sit in the partnerships, they fully understand and they work with us. You know, in a whole lot of ways, it's not their. They don't make these types of decisions, so it's not those individuals, because we work very closely with those individuals. I mean, there's something. I think it's wider than the terms and conditions. I mean, on the neighbourhood renewal funded and the strategy in 2009, the budget was in and around 25-26 million. And in 2024, it's in and around 18 million. So there's actually been, over the austerity period that's been implemented, neighbourhood renewal has dropped. Whereas if it had been in ordinary times and expanding and growing and engaging with all our departments, it should be running around 39 million. No, so we're literally 50% behind where this. I mean, and we will be judged as having delivered a strategy that hasn't delivered. I mean, our hands are tied behind our back at times, and I think that's something that needs to be taken into consideration, and we're pushing that very, very strongly in the review.
And particularly a time when we've had 10 years of complete austerity, resulting in that kind of report today that 34% of people are now finding real difficulty with their cost of living. This was out this morning. So we're doing this work in the background of real hardship in our communities caused by austerity. So we've got less money to do work in conditions where things are much, much harder for people on the ground.
Very well, my point, very briefly here.
It's just from yourselves, I would just like to ask, obviously the staff's critical, it's in a critical situation now, and we know running costs have been cut. Likewise, capital's been gone. Yeah. And I know over the years, obviously, he's been working closely with it regarding the anti-poverty strategy and moving that forward. And I know all of us have been kind of calling that needs to urgently be moved forward by the department and within that context. But for this not to happen again, because this has gone on since 2009, I'm just conscious of, and obviously you have engaged through the forum with the anti-poverty strategy. Is there something else that needs to happen to ensure that the likes of the neighbourhood renewal organisations and groups, and it's not just 26 neighbourhood renewal partnerships, this is hundreds of groups and then thousands of individuals that are benefiting every year. Is there another structure or mechanism that something needs to be created within the community and the department as a body or as a structure that continues to move forward in a positive light to not only address what's previously happened over the last 12 years, but that to ensure it never happens again?
I suppose one of the kind of the big things when Neighbourhood Renewal was set up, it was a government-led strategy, but the community was one partner. Now it's really become a strategy where it's the community, where government come and go as they please. So that kind of joined upness that you're talking about there, just what was the original vision for people in place in Neighbourhood Renewal? I think that has kind of faded away over the years, where now really it's nice, the whole programme is really now seen to be the responsibility of community groups, trying to do tiny pieces of work with tiny budgets.
Just in relation to what you're saying, I think it has to be back to the programme for government. Mm-hmm. That's where you really have to be looking at, to have some kind of overarching cross-departmental basis on how you address all the stuff in the areas of deprivation.
It might be just useful to, even if you have time to bring forward maybe just your thoughts on the kind of key mechanism of how, through all the experience that we had, is there other kind of vehicles or mechanisms or something that could ensure that it is developed? This doesn't come to here like this again, because
there's a mention in the paper about an independent benchmarking study. Is that the sort of vehicle that you're thinking of?
I'd brought it up benchmarks against NJC scales.
Oh, right, okay. Different.
But it's much larger, although this is critical.
Well, I think fundamentally people in place, of all the kind of strategies I've read from governments over the years about deprivation, when I first read it back in 2003, I thought, this is the best piece of work I've ever seen. This is a fantastic strategy. It's completely well thought through. It's got all the bells and whistles. It should really work. And at the start it kind of did, but then over time what happened is it kind of was sliced away. So it never really kind of matched up to the potential it has. I think the idea of people working collaboratively of all government agencies and people from community volunteer groups working together in areas to targeted interventions on poverty in small areas can absolutely work, but we need to get everybody around the table. I think loads of partnerships are just people are now.
I'm going to very briefly.
Very brief. It's not even a question, Chair. It's just as a pointer. We're all very, very clear and have been for some time about the public finances of this place, but that does not in any way justify the situation that you have all found yourselves in since 2009. The reality is, that, and you've hit the nail on the head, the programme for government needs to prioritise the work that you guys do on the ground for the communities you support, because the cure or the prevention is much better than the cure. So it's important that you are funded. So don't let them give you the cop out of austerity. If there's money to be found and a recognition of the work that you do, you demand it and you put the people you represent first, which you do every day. So don't let departments tell you that they haven't got the money when the role you do is so critical and so fundamental to our communities and our society. So just be very firm in relation to that, which I know you are from the presentation today.
Thank you. And listen, thank you. I think you've actually made really good use of your committee time, and I have to say I think that's reflected by the document you sent us, because you set out the problems really clearly and the solutions as well, and you do have broad support, and that's clear from the committee here. I do really worry about the effect on staff morale, because very much of what you do is dependent not only on a significant bank of knowledge and a significant bank of expertise, but also the crucial relationships, especially with young people. And if you lose those staff, you lose, and those relationships cannot be replaced with a training programme or with a catch-up programme. And that's fundamental. Actually, I think the model, I would love to see the model and the success that you have generated with the work you have done extended out rather than cut back. I would like to see smaller areas in rural parts of the country benefiting from some of the work you do. I think the point's really well made on austerity in the fact that you're dealing with more difficult situations for people with less resource. I also think the point has been made by several members, I know Melissa made it, around the penny wise, pound foolish element of all of this. All of the difficulties that will emerge as a result of this work not being done well will cost volumes more than the preventative work. So we have to get better at that, and I think that's something. So thank you for your time today. There's no doubt we'll be looking at it again, but appreciate your input today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Kelly, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Chair, could we ask for a written briefing, not maybe an oral briefing, a written briefing from the department? The guys here talked about the statutory footing. I want to drill down into what is the statutory footing. The Neighbourhood Renewal legislation and policy, and the fact is that we have representatives that have sat on their boards forever, it seems. They know this, they know about it. What's the response to their paper?
Yep. Members content, we seek that? Yep. Thank you. Okay, members, thank you very much, and we will move on now to agenda item 7, which is a briefing by the NI Federation of Housing Associations. So I want to welcome then this morning to our meeting Mr. Seamus Lehane, that's the right way to say it, Seamus, Chief Executive. And Seamus, I'll go ahead and invite you to make a brief opening statement, please, and then we'll get to questions from members. And also appreciate your contribution in terms of your written submission has been very, very good today. I think they're actually all very good today in that they're succinct. They're to the point, and that's really useful. So that will inform the members' engagement. So go ahead, Seamus, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for inviting us here today as well. So my name is Seamus Lehane, Chief Executive of the Northern Ireland Federation of Housing Associations. We're an association formed in 1977. We represented 20 registered housing associations across Northern Ireland. We manage over 60,000 social homes across Northern Ireland, as well as building and providing social homes. We also, through co-ownership, our member provide co-ownership options. And I suppose what we're here today is really just to talk about some of the challenges we have, how obviously you as a committee can help us go forward. And to give you a little bit of an overview about what housing associations are. Housing associations we are social enterprises, we're charities. What would they receive from rental income? It's reinvested into the organisation, into the funding of new homes, repairs and upgrades. We work very closely with the Department for Communities and also the Housing Executive as well. So we get our funding through the Department for Communities, and then the allocation process and where we build obviously is directed then by the Housing Executive. The beauty of a housing association is that basically your money, you double the money that you put towards social housing. So for every £1 government gives us, we can nearly double that with another £1 that we get then from private finance. So to give you an example, in Belfast, one of the largest housing schemes in Northern Ireland at the moment, one of our members was able to get through the department around about £52 million in funding, and then they were able to go to private finance and get around about £49 million. With social housing is that the government will always be like the majority shareholder, and our part in that is obviously we're strictly regulated, because as you as the public shareholder in that, we have to show good governance, that what we're building and providing is obviously for the benefit of the tenants, and there's what we build is sustainable as well. As a sector as well, over the last 5 years, we've delivered nearly 7,000 social homes across Northern Ireland, 5,000 through co-ownership. Like I said, we manage around 60,000 homes at the moment. And total borrowings in those last 5 years, nearly £1.5 billion as well. So we're a major player in not just providing social and affordable homes for people, but we're a major supporter of the construction sector, and obviously of the local supply chains are behind that as well. So our asks today really of the committee, obviously we would really look to get a standalone housing outcome under the programme for government if we really want to address the housing crisis at the moment. The executive must enhance its budget for building new social homes and for the supporting people. Social homes at the moment, last year we faced a 14% cut in that funding that I outlined what the Department for Communities give us. So in the 22-23 financial year we received £184 million, and then 23-24 that was cut by 14% down to 159. And like I said, I go back to that point I made before. We can borrow, we can almost match fund what you give us. So the less money that we get from DFC, the less then we can then take in then from private to build more homes. So obviously we'd like to see that enhanced. And with the SP funding, for anyone that isn't aware of supporting people funding, that's a service that housing associations provide to enable people to live independently. So rather than being in the care of maybe the local health trusts, we can then put them into homes that are adapted and then provide the care and support services for those people. And that's additional funding. At the moment, that funding hasn't kept pace with inflation for over 10 years. Some of our associations are running SP services at a deficit. They're actually subsidising because they simply don't get enough from the department to fund that. And that's showing basically, I suppose the evidence in that is that the allocated budget from DFC is £72 million for SP. The overcommitment is for last financial year was by 4 million. So that even shows that the money isn't enough for that. And then obviously we that's compounded obviously with like changes like with inflation, with labour, recruitment, retention. I think our previous speakers talk about obviously holding on to staff, attracting staff. Because the funding's not keeping pace with inflation, it's very difficult to keep pace obviously with paying people what they deserve. And we talk about minimum wage. We don't want to pay minimum wage. We want to pay beyond that. Minimum wage is the floor in that. We'd like to pay more. So we need more money, obviously, to recruit and retain the staff, and obviously make sure that we can let those people live independently who look after SP. Because believe me, the cost will be more for the public purse if those people had to go into the care of health trusts on that. So that, in summarising, there is a couple of more points I'd like to go through in the Q&A. But housing right now, I think really we're in the middle of a housing crisis. It's the challenge of our time. There's demand. Demand is rising. The waiting list is at 46,000 applicants. The Simon community recently broke that down to actually, when you break that into people, it's around about 82,000 people here in Northern Ireland are waiting to get in. And that's actually 4,500 children in Northern Ireland are now classed as homeless. And these are the people, some of the most vulnerable in society, who we want to give them a home for life. And that's what housing associations do. It's a home for life for people. So work with us on that. I think basically the demand is rising. We have uncertain budgets. We need multi-year budgets. We have issues with land availability. We have issues with planning delays. It's been in the media this week with things like infrastructure, water connections are holding us back. So I think what's happening, actually, there's a perfect storm brewing in the background here with housing. And, you know, I think really when we talk about the provision of long-term sustainable homes, I think really it's something that we're going to be judged on by future generations. I think when they look back on here in Northern Ireland, what have we done with housing? What have we done with the environment? I only looked down 50 miles down the road into the Republic of Ireland. They're trying to spend their way quickly out of a housing crisis. And I think really we need to learn from the lessons down south and tackle the problem head on now. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Seamus. And I suppose those issues, no doubt, will get teased out. I suppose one of the things that occurs to me as you're speaking is around the house sales, and I know there had been on an increase in trajectory of 160 in 2021-22. But there has been then that right to buy, but there still exists voluntary sales arrangements. So can you provide any information in terms of the sales figures for 2023?
Well, sales figures right to buy ended for housing associations, so we don't have that at the moment. I know
voluntary arrangements, so some sales still ongoing. Am I right?
That can happen voluntarily. Yeah.
So what's the volume of those?
I don't have them to hand at the moment. No, but
if you could send those through to us, and then just a more broader question in relation to: do you think that needs to be the case with the housing executive as well? That end of right to buy.
I think because I don't think it's wise to be selling houses while there is such high demand for social housing at the moment. I think putting those houses into private ownership, sometimes they may well just end up in the private rental sector. Again, sometimes you're giving people maybe certainty. It is good. We do like mixed tenure in developments. And that's what I think one of the objectives of the right to buy was. But I think right now, is it wise when there's such high demand for social housing? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My second question then is around the bespoke housing for disabilities, and you've mentioned their housing for life, and that involves the energy efficiency of them, but also the ability for us to provide care at home, which is what the health service is meant to do. Would you be satisfied that you have the right tools in order to provide the right mix of housing to ensure, and I have had difficulties in this in my own constituency, around sites where you're trying to maximise what you can do on a site, but there might be some of the housing needs to be bungalow or needs to be fitted for particular disabilities. What's your view on that issue?
Yeah, our target with the department, so out of all the houses that we build per annum, the target for the year just ended was 10% to be wheelchair accessible. Obviously there's additional costs with that have to be factored in, and we were very close to hitting, I think we're looking around about 8% of what we actually built last year was wheelchair accessible. So we acknowledge it. Bungalows, obviously, again, we like to build those. A lot of our developments, like Cat 1 developments, are for people over the age of 55. I think we have an aging population here, and as acknowledged by us, we need to build more properties like that. If we want to keep people out of residential care, let them live independently, more houses are like that, but that all comes down to the grant because it's more money then.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead to members then, so I'm starting off with Daniel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Seamus, for that and the work that you do. Just a couple of questions. You're saying there's 46,000 on waiting list for a house. How many houses do you actually think that we need to satisfy the demand? And you also tell us we're building more than 700 fewer houses than we need each year, but housing associations have exceeded all of those targets, and congratulations to them for doing so. If this is so, who, in your opinion, is failing to meet their targets? And the final question I have is in relation to planning, which is a disaster, and it's something that each of us in our respective constituencies are continually faced with in terms of hurdles. What challenges are you hearing from housing associations in terms of Northern Ireland Water's concerns around lack of capacity in the wastewater network, and how is that hindering the progression of applications for housing developments across Northern Ireland?
The first point with the target, so we need to be building a minimum of 2,200 homes a year. That's acknowledged by the department. Funding doesn't enable that, quite frankly. So if we get enough money, we can do that. We can only do the money that we're given. So the failing's really on that there. Really comes down just to our budget. So we need that enhanced first and foremost. The budget we were given, so for last year, for example, for Northern Ireland, our allocation on the budget was to complete something like 1,500 homes. And we exceeded that. We got about 1,550 on that. So we're going over that. This year, for the year just ended, 23-24, our target was to deliver 1,500 starts and 1,400 completions. Now, we're waiting on the department to release that information. I think we should have it imminent. But I'd be relatively confident that we hit those targets as associations. So we're hitting the targets, but right now the targets are too low. Do you know? But we're doing our bit. And in saying that, I think as well, the same was for last year as well. For Northern Ireland, our targets were slightly below that, but we're slightly higher, because the budget was 14% more, but we exceeded the targets. But we want to be hitting like 2,200 plus a year. A multi-year budget would give us that. We can certainly tool up. Housing associations have the capacity to tool up, to scale up, to deliver that number of houses. But it all comes down to give us the money and give us the multi-year budget so we can plan it. Because at the moment we're living year to year. With planning, yes, you're right. The 11 councils. I sit on NIFA. We have a planning working group at the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce. You might have seen there was a paper published there at the end of January. Planning process, quite simply, it is too slow. Improving the timelines will help the projects. A lot of it's down to the statutory consultee response times. We get a lot of hold-ups with that. Our suggestions to that was actually major social housing projects could be prioritised within planning to help them through the system, to expedite them, especially in areas of high need. So it would be really good, because the housing executive manage the areas of need, and the waiting list, is that there should be a process maybe where councils are working with the housing executive very closely to identify areas where need is built and then prioritise the planning processes for those. And also working with local councils to improve that as well. So the local development plans, a lot of councils have put in, for example, like a 20% ratio. So if you're building a development, let's say as a private developer, 100 houses, the planning permission would say, right, 20% of those should be social and affordable. So we're working with that at the moment. I'm going around. I've now visited 9 out of the 11 councils, given presentations to the councils, brought members along, just about how we can work with these local development plans. But they're not there yet. With Northern Ireland Water, obviously, that's a huge issue. It's been in the media this week. You've seen figures there around about 18,000 homes refusing on. That would come down to, it's actually more closer to about 18,000 refusals. So at the moment, if I put in an application to build a house in Belfast, pretty much automatically Northern Ireland Water will refuse it because of their concerns about the capacity in Belfast before they even look at it. Now, a lot of the time it's at the discretion of the council to either grant the planning permission or not. But because the system is under so much strain, Northern Ireland Water will simply just object to everything, whether I'm building 100 houses or I'm looking to build an extra bathroom in my house.
Just for the record, Chair, this is important. How many housing applications from social housing associations have been rejected as a consequence of the lack of capacity in terms of wastewater?
I could come back to you with that there.
That's important. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Kelly.
Thank you very much, Seamus. I have to say, you mentioned retrofit in your presentation. Seamus and I would have known each other, have passed through transport when I got very excited about engines. Now I'm very excited about retrofitting. I agree with you that there needs to be a strategy brought through communities, probably in connection with finance and economy, about retrofitting in Northern Ireland, and we can't leave behind our social housing operators and partners in that. Could I just thank your members? I've been out to visit a number of them to hear directly from them their concerns, and you've reiterated them very well today. Reform of the planning system is extremely important. One of your members I spoke to was having the difficulty that they were having is that match funding. So you could have government funding for a development, and then you get your partner funding, whether that comes from a bank or private enterprise. But it's 2 years before a shovel can break the ground because of the delays in planning. And to be honest, when you're trying to attract private investment, that's a disaster. I would love to hear your thoughts on that, about that, how that financial impact has on your members because the planning is so delayed. And if you take out a mortgage, for instance, on that amount, or a loan on that amount, the interest is still being paid over those 2 years. I would like to also hear from you. I know Daniel has mentioned about Northern Ireland Water. I actually think that the criteria that the housing executive adapt and use to decide whether or not there's need in an area is concerning, because I know of a few of your members who have gone to the housing executive, identified areas and been turned down to put social housing there because the housing executives say the need isn't there. I know rightly, if they built the houses, it'd be filled in the morning. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about is you've mentioned about the overhaul of the points system. What's your thoughts on that, just very generally?
Thanks, Kelly. On the finances, the finance systems obviously for social housings they're different in each of the devolved regions. Housing budgets in GB, they have statutory underpinning. So that means basically it's not subject to the whims of ministers maybe looking to cut costs year on year. There is a statutory amount that they will commit. So I think having something like that there, that's why we've looked at really, getting housing as under the programme for government, some type of obligation that there will be money, just like the way health gets assurances what they will get. That housing gets that, and the fact that social housing budget, it doesn't have any legislative backing here that it does elsewhere in the UK hinders us. So I think basically having that underpinning of a budget and the multi-year budget, I think that would give more certainty and reliability to housing associations, but also the lenders in there as well. You talked about retrofit. At the moment, retrofit's a massive problem we need to tackle here. Thankfully, housing associations, our latest study shows that out of our 60,000 properties, about 74% of our properties are an EPC rating of C and above. So they're the homes that we have are modern, they're relatively carbon efficient. But that means we've got about 13,000 homes that are D and below, and they're the homes that we want to retrofit in Northern Ireland. The problem that we have here is that we are the only part of the UK, or even the only part of this island, that doesn't have a grant scheme for retrofitting social homes. So if I just say very quickly, in Scotland, the Scottish Government have allocated £200 million over 3 years to 2026 for social housing retrofit. Wales have given £150 million up until the end of next year. And in the Republic of Ireland, they've given for this financial year alone €90 million for retrofitting social housing. And that's backed up in GB. In England, in December, an additional £1.5 billion was given towards retrofitting. Now, Northern Ireland could get through that through the Barnett, but because it's not ring-fenced, the money goes into the pot and it's spent elsewhere. So we're the only region in Northern Ireland doing absolutely nothing to help with the retrofit of social housing. So that would be a big ask of ours. Now, we're not sitting, the housing associations, we're not sitting with the bulls saying, well, listen, give us a grant, and we're not going to do anything until we get that. We're actually being proactive here. At the moment, NIFA is working with partners, including DFC and SIB, to put together a business case to access financial transaction capital money, where we can go, take a loan, and carry out retrofit work. But we would like to see in the long run, because that's still us doing that at our own expense. It is a loan from government, albeit at a lower interest rate. But we would like to see that hand in hand with a grant coming from government. So I think that would be coming through. The next point...
Can I just ask you, Seamus, just on that retrofit, I spent a bit of time with Bayview and Newry talking about the work that they're doing in County Louth, and went to visit some of the houses there. Incredible amount of work that the South is doing. Is there any mention about changing the EPC to the BEAR rating so that we can actually retrofit on a basis to bring the houses up to C standard, instead of having to go and do the whole thing all at once? We can actually do the roof space, the walls, the windows, the doors, and then the heat pump system.
Yeah, we're looking at the EPC setting probably does need upgrade here for Northern Ireland, and at the moment we actually had a members forum yesterday with heads of development. Everything we're building at the moment is at a B rating minimum. Some are coming in at an A rating. There's even some schemes proposed at a passive house standard. I agree. Yeah, we probably need to look at about making that. And I think when we're looking about on the areas of need. Yes, again, I've gone around councils where they've said, listen, houses aren't being built, yet they're saying people are coming. It's about people, sometimes people are hesitant to put their names down in a particular area because they feel like I don't have a chance to get a home there, so I'll put my name down somewhere down the road, a couple of miles away, because I have a better chance. So maybe just managing that needs to be looked at. And the other question, Kelly, I think was on the point system. Yeah. The allocation system. I think that's long overdue, an update. So that there was a 2020 review sought to implement 18 of the 20 recommended changes, but it did not propose any new legislation to support these changes or the scheme. The decision not to implement 2 of the recommendations, in our opinion, were wrong, and that the allocation system needs reformed, particularly around intimidation points. I think really what we've seen around the allocation process is quite cosmetic. It needs completely overhauled. The 2 rejected proposals around intimidation points and interim accommodation points were to be considered further. I think these need to be prioritised with clear outcomes for the reform to be set. I think at the last executive it was being looked at, but no final decision was taken. But I know that does create a lot of problems. When we're looking about creating tenant sustainability, the point system needs to be there. And the only people who are actually impacted by the thing like the intimidation points is housing associations, because we're the only people building new developments. If you have a new development who's ready to welcome tenants this year, you're obviously going to get people in that area at the top of the waiting list. To get anywhere close to getting a social home at the moment, you probably need about 200 points. If you present with intimidation points, because you're classed as homelessness and intimidation points, you're getting 300 points. You're top to the list. And usually people like that are coming with quite complex needs. And to put people with such complex needs and management responsibilities, the housing association, into one development, I don't think it's helping anyone, the housing association or those people.
Thank you. Okay, I have to move swiftly on here.
I'll not keep short because a lot you've already covered, Seamus, so thank you very much. And obviously you're well aware, and I know it has been reiterated, how critical it is and a priority for a standalone outcome in the programme for government. And I think that's something that we all would agree is critical in moving forward and trying to address housing need in the area. And I also think we need the cross-party or cross-departmental collaboration, which is critical again regarding housing supply and the planning reforms and the issues. And I suppose like Kelly as well, and particularly, and I know obviously you'd mentioned about 11,000 of your properties regarding below EPC 3. Obviously, we're well aware from the housing sector point of view, there's 60,000 of their 80,000 property are in that area where a retrofit grant or investment is absolutely critical, particularly for the health and well-being of the individuals living within the accommodation, but also for the actual structure of the homes themselves into the future and that environment. So I just would like to probe a wee bit more regarding, you had mentioned obviously across GB and across ROI, what kind of work has been done maybe with yourselves at departments in relation to scale and size of a grant and how that would work? And I'm conscious obviously of the private sector as well. I'm dealing with a lot of people within their own private dwellings now. Even yesterday, World War II prefab accommodation, elder ladies lived there all their life, cannot afford to retrofit or improve her property, and is really living an unhealthy environment. Like, what's available at the minute? There's nothing because of the repair grant has been cut, the renovation grants have been cut, there's been no investment in that, so that's something that needs to be critical. But just your thoughts on the scale and the level of how a grant and a level of grant would basically be required given the experience that you have in lifetime homes now and the high standards that you are building to as housing associations with your new accommodation.
It's something needs to be looked at before we spend any money on retrofit. We need to see what needs to be done. Probably the other thing, what we haven't done in Northern Ireland, what they have done in the other parts of the UK and down south, is that we haven't actually defined what is retrofit. So the concern is me as a housing association. If I decide to go out and retrofit 100 properties this year, I have no assurance that in 2 years' time, a department, someone might come along and say, actually, well done on doing that, but actually it's not what we would have done because here's what we decided what retrofit should look like. So we need, as part of that business case that we're working on at the moment about getting an FTC, I'm also keen as well to get the department to sign off on what is a fabric-first approach to retrofit for social housing, so that we know, and also the construction sector and the people who will be doing this know exactly what do we do. And then the key thing, because we're spending public money on this and it's public, there's assets with a public interest in that, we need a verification process as well. So when we do the work, that someone then is going and verifying that the work is to a particular standard, the money's been spent wisely, etc. Cost of doing a property, to bring a property up to an EPC rating, it costs approximately, and this was a study carried out actually for the Northern Ireland Housing Executive by BRE, It was estimated maybe anything between £6,000 to about £15,500 per property. Now, I did talk to one member this week who had some very old Victorian type terrace properties with rise and damp, and to retrofit those properties would cost close to £100,000. So obviously there's some properties there where you really have to look at the financial viability of retrofitting them, which will be quite low down on the EPC ratings. So probably if you're looking at the cost of raising, if you had 13,000 housing association homes energy and you wanted to bring them up to a minimum C rating, you're probably talking anything maybe about £82 million to bring them up to a C rating. If you want to bring them up to a B rating, the jump's quite substantial. It's up to about £580 million to bring them up that, because then you're bringing in like air source heat pumps, things like this. But where we want to start with first is a fabric first, make the homes warm, insulated, and then you think about the technology in phase 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian, go ahead,
Thank you,
please.
Chair. Just for my own understanding first, Seamus, are all the housing associations in Northern Ireland in your federation?
All registered
all
housing
social-
associations, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So the numbers came down. I know there was a rationalisation of housing associations some years
Yeah.
ago, so it's 20 is correct number.
Yeah.
And so you've 60,000 properties, so you're not far behind the housing executive now. I think they're around 82, 83,000. And your housing association properties are known to be of a higher standard, more recent, and that's a credit to yourselves. I mean, personally, on Right to Buy, I support the current situation. I know it's popular with tenants, but in terms of the need for housing, social housing stock, I think it's right that housing associations, but I know that's not everyone's view, but because we need to maintain that stock. You've probably touched on these, so you don't have to give long answers where you feel you've already answered. 3 issues I wanted to raise. First of all, the opportunity sites. I would constantly be working with housing associations to try and get sites developed. What are the main obstacles? I know you've mentioned about the departmental funding, NI water, objections and so on. But I will constantly work with housing associations trying to get them to take on sites and encourage especially government departments, to release sites. Secondly, in terms of building for sale, which housing associations are starting to do increasingly, again, if that's through co-ownership options like that, ways of affordable options into home ownership. I don't know if you have statistics now about what numbers of housing association properties are actually been built to sell now, which didn't used to happen, but increasingly that option is available. And the third one, again, you've talked about retrofitting. It's a particular grievance of mine about long-term derelict properties. And I know it's tedious work for someone to have to do, but I've said to the housing executive, where you get properties that are clearly unoccupied, for whatever circumstance, not just ones where someone maybe through some sort of fraud situation is getting housing benefit but not living there, but ones that are actually privately owned, and maybe they've been inherited by somebody or they've been repossessed and they're owned by some financial institution. But we get long-term derelict properties that are causing blight, just because they're privately owned. Can some institution, either housing associations or department, step in to a route of vesting those properties and bringing them back into public ownership, so that they can be made use of? And have there been circumstances where that has happened, where properties have been vested and maybe passed on to a housing association?
Thank you, Brian. Yeah. Briefly,
Thank you,
please.
on sites, barriers to sites, as you will know, in North Belfast, in your area, Brian, it's probably one of the areas of highest need. Obviously Belfast and Derry and Strabane and Newrymoor and Down are the 3 areas with highest need.
Executive as well.
Yeah, barriers, obviously land is a problem with us. I suppose where government can help us, some of the largest landowners in Northern Ireland is Northern Ireland Water and Northern Ireland Housing Executive and the Education Board. So Northern Ireland Water own considerably huge amounts of land that they have here. So when we talk about maybe funding, there's opportunities there maybe for land to be identified for social housing, for good, societal need. that could be passed on. I suppose if we're looking at what's happening down south to tackle the housing crisis there, with the establishment of the Land Development Agency, who are going out and invest in land and properties and then handing it over for social housing. So this week there was a derelict retail estate on the Nace Road in Dublin. The LDA have now bought that, they've vested it, and they're going to hand that over to build over 1,000 social homes in Dublin. So maybe it's that type of thinking going forward in Northern Ireland, where we have some type of government agency that can go out and look at land that's simply lying dormant, not being used, and put it to better general need like that. Build for sale, yes, some of our associations will have arms now, private arms, where they can build properties to rent, sale. It's a minority part of the housing association, because you need to be careful on this here, because obviously they're charities, they're social enterprises, and one arm of the business cannot be seen to be making too much money, because it could obviously have an impact on the charitable status of the organisation. So they're relatively small. They're a way basically to help the company obviously build up its reserves, so it can go out to private market and borrow money to build more social housing. An instance where sometimes government feels that those private arms can be used when they can't really is like with the intermediate rental product. So a new product's been proposed by the department where it's subsidised rent. So people will go out, they can rent a property below market value, and then the difference, whether it's 20-30%, is covered with the cost of those people. And what you're doing, you're taking people off the waiting list who'll never get a chance to get a social home because they don't get enough points. And the assumption was made that housing associations would do that, but under current legislation, housing associations cannot offer a private tenure contract. And then the assumption was, well, the private arm would, but there's a fear there as well that if a housing association gets too involved in private work and becomes a big thing, it jeopardises obviously the registered housing association, the status of that being a charity. So that's something to work. And then on the voids, I think we kind of touched on that really. I think that's something. There's a lot of areas, especially in Belfast. We've got a lot of part of the inner city that has been bought by speculators. It's lying dormant. It's almost been held ransom, almost parts of the city. It would be brilliant if council, if department could go out there, invest land and hand it over to the housing executive, to housing associations to provide a much needed homes.
Okay. Thank you. And I suppose my concern on the private arm of the housing association thing is not only that they would tip themselves out of charity status, but that the focus starts to go more and more. That's a wee bit of a concern in that. But thank you. Morris, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'll be brief because you've actually covered most of the stuff, Seamus, and thanks very much for that. But when you talk about mixed housing, where there's rented property and some of the rented property has now been bought by tenants, etc., and you go for your retrofit, will that retrofit be offered to the private house owner at a cost? When you're doing the scheme, say for instance in one area, if there's any private houses in there who may avail of that scheme because of the same type of houses, would that be something that you would see as being normal, provided the private house owner pays for the retrofit as opposed to you doing it on your rented property?
Yeah, that's a challenge for a lot of the retrofit work. When I talk to associations and they call it like pepper potting, so you could have a terrace row of houses and every other one could be a social home, and in between's private rental. They're the most challenging to do, obviously. It wouldn't be something where a housing association could go out and maybe sell that retrofitting service to the private neighbours. It could be something maybe where the contractors who are doing that work, it could be offered. I think the challenge will be private homeowners. I think would be in their interest to do something like that, maybe available rent. I think where the challenge is going to be is the private rental market of getting private landlords to invest that money on retrofitting, because they're going to see it as an expense. But it could be something where contractors could push out to neighbours of social housing.
If they were doing something in an area, they could let her drop the private sectors in that area and offer the opportunity to take it up at a cost. And the other one, my chestnut is the point system. I think it's a disaster. I think the point system we have here in this wee country of ours actually breaks communities up, especially in the rural area where people have to move out of the area to get a house. And you lose that social fabric. I mean, I don't know, my mother hadn't been my babysitter whenever I was setting off, I'd have been beat. And I think everybody's in that you need that community spirit, you need that hands-on availability of people to do things to help young people through their earlier marriage in their life. So that's vital, and I think that needs to be addressed. And I also think the point system is unfair for people who are, let's say, not really perfect tenants, seem to get more points than people who are perfect tenants, and it's not fair. It needs to be addressed, and I would like that. The other thing is, when you talk last one, and it's been brought up here time and again by various members in the committee, is the lack of infrastructure, but not just in the urban areas, but the rural areas too. We suffer greatly from not having the opportunity to have people like yourself come in and build houses in the rural community. Brief enough, Chair?
Thanks, Mark. Yes, that was very good. Well, Lisa, very briefly.
Thank you, Lord. Seamus, very welcome. Seamus, just very quickly, do you have a strategy for integrating communities?
We have,
a strategy in relation to the integration of communities.
Yeah.
When it comes to either both the building of the houses or the allocation of houses.
Yeah, through our preference now is mixed tenures, and shared housing is a big aspect of our work now. And there's a speaker here after me this morning actually who would have good examples. I was at a site this Monday in Newton Abbey of shared housing, which is a great example. So that's something we want to do more of, and there is additional funding as well available for building shared housing developments going forward as well. So absolutely, we're after shared housing in every aspect, both in background of people, on their both socio and economic. We want that. I think that's a good thing for us. And going back as well to the rural issue, because I know your constituency is rural as well. We do want to build more rural homes. There is a challenge there with the cost ratio analysis, but we want to build more. It's important. It protects local infrastructure, schools, etc. Because a lot of people won't put their name on the waiting list in a rural area because, again, they'll think, I'll go to an urban area, I have a better chance of getting a social home. We do want to do it. We've got members. One of our members is Rural Housing Association. We're building social homes at the moment in Rathlin Island. Hopefully completion soon. Be great to get members of the committee out there when they're opening that. But the rural aspect is something we need to tackle. And I think the target the department has, ideally, of what we build every year, they would like 12% of social homes to be in rural areas. The previous financial year, the delivery was actually 4%, so we're not hitting that target. I'm hopeful this year when the figures are released by the department, we've at least maybe hopefully doubled what we're delivering in rural areas. But yeah, infrastructure, planning's a big issue in rural areas as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Seamus, and thank you for some very detailed and concise answers there, I have to say, and your commitment to pass on some further information that has been requested back to committee. But thank you for your attendance here today.
I second the visit to Rathlin.
and give us a good day for that as well, Sean, please. All right, Seamus, thank you, noted, and thank you very much. Members going to take, so go ahead, Kelly. Yeah,
I was just going to say, could I possibly ask if we could write to the executive for an update from them on the standalone housing outcome and the programme for government discussions, because we don't know what's happening with that at the moment. It'd be good to have that outline.
Yep. Members agreed with that?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Okay, members, going to take a very short comfort break there. Less than 5 minutes. We can manage back here very shortly after 11:35, please.
Just confirm.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Normally you would do like one.
You're going to be busy.
To open and no 5 minutes.
Homeless Connect, yeah. Okay, members, thank you. So we are resuming our meeting now at agenda item 8, which is today a briefing by Homeless Connect. And there's a copy of a briefing paper from Homeless Connect at page 197. And I'd like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting: Nicola McCrudden, who is Chief Executive Officer, and Mark Bailey, who is Policy and Public Affairs Manager. And I'd just like to say, in keeping actually, I think the quality of the briefings provided by all of the groups today has been really, really good, in that the key issues are set out very clearly and very succinctly, and that's been really beneficial to members. So hopefully that will carry through, because your briefing is similarly very, very targeted, and that's useful for us. So Nicola, if I could come back to you and invite you to go ahead and make a brief opening statement, if you could, please.
Absolutely.
And then we'll go to members.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much to the committee members for inviting Homeless Connect to present on homelessness, and that's something that we will obviously be majoring on as part of this presentation. I was pleased to hear the committee agreeing to write to the Executive around the programme for government and a housing and homelessness outcome, because that's something that we were going to talk about, but that has been netted off as such in terms of the action that the committee has taken. I would only describe the situation at the minute in terms of homelessness as dire. I've worked in the sector for 30 years, so it's never been at its worst, and I think it's completely unreasonable, unacceptable that so many children are living in temporary accommodation today. So I want to make that as an opening statement. What we're going to focus on is supporting staff, supporting people in this presentation. We'll also look at housing first. And then finally we'll come on to legislative amendments, because I know you have the briefings in front of you, and we're happy to come back on any of the issues raised on that. Firstly, I'd like to just start off with a little bit about Homeless Connect. I know that we've met with a number of you. I know you'll be familiar with our services, but maybe you mightn't be familiar with all our services. So we're a membership organisation. We were founded over 40 years ago to represent organisations who are working with people experiencing homelessness. So most of our members would have temporary accommodation. We also support membership providing street outreach, and that will be on the streets of Belfast and also in Derry, Londonderry as well. We also provide support for day centres for people who are experiencing homelessness to come in to get a meal, to get fed, to get washed, etc. And we also support advice charities as well. In addition to that, we have a long track record of supporting people with lived experience, and we've been doing that now for a number of years, and we're working with two groups at the minute. One in Belfast and one in the northwest in Derry City. So they have met with the Housing Executive and Grania Long and others as well, and have fed into a number of different consultations. And we're very keen to be working with partners in the Housing Executive to take forward that work in terms of having lived experience programme and to run alongside the homelessness strategy as well. We also provide the Frontline Network in Northern Ireland. That supports workers on the front line through training and networking opportunities, and that's part of a UK-wide network. Home Starter Pack service, which you've probably heard of, I'm sure a number of your constituencies have benefited from that, where we provide basic household items for people who are moving from homelessness into their first tenancy. And that's because if you're moving into social tenancy, of course, you don't have anything. And if you're experiencing homelessness, the chances are you literally don't have anything. So that provides things to enable people to cook, etc. And, you know, we're also providing food, for example, because what we found is when we were going around to people's homes, they didn't have any food, which is absolutely shocking. And we're able to do that through the work with our other project, which is Fair Share. So we operate the Fair Share franchise for Northern Ireland as part of a UK-wide network as well, and that operates in all district council areas. And we take surplus food, which is going to be going to waste, and divert that to charity partners, and also schools for breakfast clubs and that kind of thing. So that's a very important project to us, and we're able to provide food through people who are getting new tenancies to that initiative as well. So I'm going to touch on supporting staff, supporting people. I'm going to hand over to Mark, who's going to cover the other two areas as well, because as we know, I mean, I as a Chief Executive absolutely value every single member of staff that I have. Staff is our greatest asset, and within the homelessness sector, we have an amazing talent of staff there, but sadly, I would say, with research we conducted in 2022 said that there are issues in terms of staff retention and recruitment. And Seamus pointed that as well, and this is to do with the level of funding that's going into services. So we haven't seen an inflationary uplift really since 2007. There was one that happened 1 year, but yeah, members who are providing services are having to deal with inflationary uplifts annually. Now that Supporting People Fund was ring-fenced, and at that time that was excellent, so we didn't see money going anywhere else, but it actually works the other way in terms of us then not being able to get those uplifts. I would say I wouldn't say we're facing a crisis situation at the minute, but this has been going on now for a number of years, and some of our members have said it's got to the stage where really some of the services now are unsustainable. And I think you've probably heard that before as well from the Department for Communities and the Housing Executive. So if we were to lose some of these larger schemes as a result of lack of funding going into the sector, that would obviously have huge consequences. So it's a real concern for us. The minimum wage is coming in, Seamus referred to that as well, and we did a quick survey really with our members, and 91% are concerned about the impact of minimum wage. If they're not getting any inflationary uplift, how are they going to actually meet the minimum wage cost? 9% actually said that they're not going to be able to do it. So I think you're all aware of the Supporting People funding situation. In terms of the homelessness funding situation, it faces equal problems, just in terms of the fact that we're working on an annual budget. How in the name of goodness you're supposed to prevent homelessness when you're just constantly working to annual budgets and you're just reacting to the crisis? So I'm going to hand over to Mark now, who's going to talk about some of the solutions and some of the asks that we have.
Great, thank you, Nicola. Yes, so I'm going to touch on two areas. Firstly, Housing First, which is an approach to addressing chronic homelessness. As many of you may know, the traditional model in homelessness services, often referred to as the staircase model, is that people are first expected to demonstrate that they're housing ready, in inverted commas, meaning that they have to prove that they're able to live independently or only with low levels of support before they can access stable housing. In contrast, services which adopt a Housing First approach provide housing as soon as possible, without attaching conditions such as, for example, requiring people to abstain from drugs or alcohol. And the heart of Housing First is that the individuals in the services have a high degree of control over the support they receive and the treatment and services that they use. It was first developed in the 1990s in the United States, and it's been used in several countries around the world now. And there is literally a forest of papers that outline the evidence base in favour of this approach with regard to responding to chronic homelessness. It's not a silver bullet that's going to solve all our issues around homelessness. I'm not claiming that. It is designed to benefit people who are at the chronic end. But if it's viewed as part of a wider package of measures, it can really make a real difference. We do have it in operation in Northern Ireland on a small scale. There are two schemes, one for adults, which is run by DePaul, and Housing First for Youth, which is run by the Simon community, and both are very highly regarded services. And currently the Housing Executive is conducting research on how they can scale up the use of Housing First. And you may wish to contact the Housing Executive to hear more about the progress of that piece of research. We as an organisation strongly support the scaling up of Housing First. But for that to happen, we need a wider cultural shift around how we respond to chronic homelessness, moving away from the staircase model towards a Housing First approach. I want to briefly touch on complex lives, which some of you may have heard of. This has been one of the more encouraging developments in the homelessness sector in recent years. And we do commend Belfast City Council and their partner agencies for the leadership they have shown in driving this model forward in what were very challenging circumstances whenever they introduced it. It was created to provide joined up, that's a crucial point, joined up support for some of Belfast's most vulnerable people who have fallen into a cycle of rough sleeping, addiction, poor mental and physical health and offending behaviour. At the core of it is providing wraparound support to people in this situation. And it's not a new layer of services. It's a coordination of already existing services. That's a very important point to understand. And it seeks to really drive things forward in terms of partnership and break down silos between services and between statutory bodies, which, as you'll all know, is quite a challenge. So Complex Lives is distinct from Housing First. It's not the same thing. The model can work without Housing First, but what it does show is what well-coordinated support services can look like. And then turning just briefly to legislative reform, our legislative framework in Northern Ireland around homelessness is primarily in the Housing NI Order 1988. We believe that it needs to be fundamentally reconsidered. England, Scotland and Wales have reviewed and fundamentally reformed their legislation with the goal of shifting the emphasis to preventing homelessness before it happens rather than reacting to it after the fact. The situation we currently have is a crisis model that responds whenever somebody's threatened with homelessness within 28 days or is actually homeless. And in many cases, that's too late. The damage is been done, whereas we'd be much better to move upstream. That's what we're really advocating for, and we want a legislative framework that encourages that. And I'm just very briefly going to mention Part 5 of the Housing Scotland bill, which has just come to the Scottish Parliament recently. It includes clauses on homelessness prevention, and it includes ask and act duties, which make preventing homelessness a shared responsibility across the public sector. Which is crucially not just the Housing Executive or their equivalent, the councils over there, but includes health boards, the police service, prisons. It sees it as a much more holistic, preventing homelessness is a much more holistic exercise. And we would suggest to the committee that it would be worthwhile asking Ray's to do a paper for you on what is being proposed in Scotland. And I'd also suggest taking a look at the Housing Wales white paper, which is going on at the moment, where they're bringing forward another piece of legislation in that area now. And I'll hand back to Nicola.
Yeah, so just briefly then, as you know yourselves, housing is much more than bricks and mortar, but fundamentally it is about housing supply. So we would echo what Seamus and sure others come behind us will say, that it's absolutely essential. You cannot prevent and alleviate homelessness without a proper supply of affordable social housing. So the housing supply strategy, we would ask that that's expedited as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. A very substantial briefing there, and really serious issues of concern, I have to say, and I share your concern around, all you have to do is think about how you feel yourself if you're out of your own home for even a few days. And I mean, that lack of security, especially for children, has to be absolutely devastating. And I'm conscious here we're talking about people who are not at risk of falling off the edge of protection, but have already fallen, and you are doing tremendous work in that respect. I know you're also providing tremendous support to the homelessness all-party group here in the Assembly, and that's very much appreciated as well. I'm struck by particular, Mark, your comments around the joined-up response. That has been touched upon in the earlier presentations and will be again in the later ones. I think that is crucial to moving in all of this, and resourcing and funding for yourselves and for the people. We absolutely need to see an end to long-term homelessness. We need to do better in that respect. So I'm going to go to members then for questions, and again I'll have to ask members to be brief, but also to say, members, we can do some follow-up questions as well, and we can factor some more detailed questions back to yourselves and maybe get more detailed responses in that way. So please bear that in mind as we're going around. Kelly, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, guys. Nicola, I'll jump straight into it. You talked about how important your staff are. Can I thank you and the whole team? Before Christmas, I had the opportunity to visit with the Frontline Network members and other people who are experiencing homelessness, and I have to say, a vocation wouldn't be the word that I would use for it. It's absolute dedication. I've never been so moved by a meeting in my entire life, but thank you for that. I'm just thinking about that. When we met with the department earlier as a committee, they talked about the amount of mental health support that they provide their frontline workers when dealing with benefits and dealing with different things. Have they offered any of that to you for your staff? Because the sort of work that your staff are dealing with is incredible.
I'm certainly not aware of that, if that's the case. We ourselves offer support, but that's through our own funding. We're not provided with funding to do that for our own staff who are working with people on the front line. But, quite often we're a blue light service, so staff are going into accommodation or going out in the streets and they're actually, saving lives, literally saving lives. So it obviously has psychological implications as well. So we certainly feel that the sector would benefit from that, because we don't want to lose any more staff from the sector. You can only keep people working in those kind of environments for so long, and it is very much a vocation for those who do remain and stay. So that psychological support for our staff would be absolutely amazing if we were able to access that.
In the written briefing, you mentioned the risk, Mark, of supporting people contracts being handed back. There's enough pressure on your staff as it is, but what would be the impact if that was to happen?
It could be, highly significant in terms of it would have a domino effect on other services. We're informed that there's more than one that are looking at that at the moment, and the challenges that would face supporting people in the housing executive would be very significant. I would say if there are contracts handed back, and again, actually at the heart of all this is the people that they're working to support, the people who need this service. It's highly likely that there will be negative outcomes for those people if this happens. And again, this is what happens if you freeze a budget for 15 or 16 years. These services are, in many cases, absolutely struggling. Like turnover in staff in some services is in excess of 30% in some cases, and what an effect that has on the quality of the service they can provide. And again, we're fortunate, as Nicola said, we have an incredibly dedicated workforce, but they've been pushed. They've been really pushed to the very edge here with the way the funding has worked, and we'd really urge you to do everything you can to push for supporting people to have at least an inflationary uplift, because we never came out of austerity as a sector. You know, it never ended.
We heard earlier about the 2009 sort of rates of pay in Neighbourhood Renewal. It's astonishing that Supporting People has that. Could I actually get a copy for the committee of the results of the survey that was done with Supporting People providers? Yes. That would be very useful. Just one last comment. At a previous meeting, the department said that the only way to get a house these days was to make yourself homeless and to get into that 28 days. Mm-hmm. That just adds more pressure for you guys. Yeah. We would be wanting, I mean, again, one of the aspects of legislative reform we'd be recommending would be extending that 28 day. In Scotland and Wales, they're looking at 6 months. And again, it's about trying to move it further upstream, because at the moment it is effectively a crisis.
Yeah, we need to shift the emphasis from reaction to prevention. You know, and that's really the long and short of it.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both. And the presentation was very detailed and to the point, which we do appreciate. It makes our job easier. And Mark, I haven't spoken to you in some time, but best wishes in this role. I know that you'll be extremely forensic from the work that I know you've done in other capacities at previous times. Just a number of questions. In relation to the expansion of Housing First, you're saying the presentation that it's not the silver bullet to address the housing and homelessness issues, but it's a key intervention. What, in your opinion, could it do for our particular circumstances that we face here? And how is the complex lives model related to Housing First?
So in terms of what it could do for us, there are people who go around the system who are constantly becoming homeless or maybe rehousing, come back into the system again because of their complex needs. And that's a difficult term to even use, of people with complex needs, but you know, it is a reality in terms of mental health and addiction. A lot of that is because people can't access addiction services or mental health services, so it has that. So what Housing First would do, it depends on the model that's actually presented, and I'm involved in actually the research group that the Housing Executive set up in terms of, you know, feeding into that. So the Housing Executive will be completing that research, and it definitely, as Mark said, would be good to have them up to talk about that. But it could actually move people out of temporary accommodation, out of hostel accommodation, and straight into a tenancy. And that would then free up, because I think one of the major challenges that we face is being able to move people on. So you have that silting up, and nobody should be in a hostel. It should be there is an emergency situation in very short term. So it would move people on through the system. It would free that up. But it also is a cultural shift in terms of us thinking that actually we need to look at housing first, or housing led. So we need to be looking at providing people with housing and the support they need, rather than putting them into, you know, supported accommodation. Some people do require intensive support, but there's a lot of people who are using services who may not require those. You know, so it is having that different basically viewpoint in terms of where we should be going with housing strategy and housing policy, of housing people first.
And what would the financial implications be of implementing Housing First as you propose?
The Housing Executive don't have a figure of that, and I think the issue is to try and identify the number of people who would qualify. So I know that the researchers are working with the Housing Executive in terms of getting that data. A number of the individuals will probably be a non-standard, which would be in hotels and B&Bs at the minute, actually, which we shouldn't be putting people into. Because if you've got complex needs, if you're in supported a scheme, then you've got that support from staff. But if you're in a hotel and B&B, you're less likely to have that. So I know that they are working on those stats. So it's probably one to ask the Housing Executive.
But obviously it's not the best place for those vulnerable people that may be battling addiction to be in a hotel where there's a bar. Just finally, Chair, you've put a heavy focus on legislative reform, and rightly so, and obviously the need for prevention when it comes to homelessness, because often in this society we're far too reactionary, and the cost of that is significant. What problems are we experiencing due to what you describe as the siloed ways of working that our departments operate on? So what's the implication of that on the challenges that you face in relation to homelessness?
So part of the challenge we've had historically has been that often housing or homelessness is viewed as the issues for the Department of Communities alone. And sometimes the engagement with other departments has been challenging, where it's sort of viewed as, well, that's a housing issue, it should go back. But actually it's a much wider point. And I think when the CEO of the Housing Executive was here, she spoke about the importance of education in particular. Because again, actually often it's traumatic experiences in early years, and you know that can lead people down the path towards experiencing homelessness, and really. I think at the moment there's been efforts, you know, and again during COVID actually there was it was amazing how you know how a lot of the barriers came down during that time, and we were very encouraged by that. I mean, unfortunately, there's been a bit more challenges since, you know, but again, I think what we would want to be pressing members to do is to try and see, you know, the connections between the different areas. So, for example, homelessness has huge effects on people's health, dramatic effects on people's health in some cases. And again, it costs. You know, there are major costs that come from not acting to prevent homelessness before it happens, and that's not just for the person involved; it's for wider society in terms of services around health, around education. I know you're very much an expert in that area, and you know, I mean, again, we've called for a statutory duty to cooperate to be put in. And to be fair to the housing executive as well, they've called for a legislative duty to prevent homelessness, and we, as I said in our presentation, we would support that as well. And we think it would make a positive difference. It wouldn't solve everything. We're not claiming that at all. It's one part of a bigger picture, but we think it would be valuable to do. Yeah.
Thank you, absolutely, Ciara.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first emphasise the critical work and thank Nicola, Mark and your team, particularly in relation to your secretariat role for the all-party group on homelessness. It's outstanding work that you do, and everybody really appreciates that. And then likewise, the range of current work that you do, not only supporting staff, but obviously our most vulnerable tenants, and the wraparound support and care that you give. And likewise, like Kelly, I've met your frontline staff as well. And it's dedication, it's a vocation for a lot of the staff, and if you had to pay your staff the hours that they commit to, the extra and additional hours, because they're doing it because of their heart, but as you say, enough's enough, and I think we've heard it all morning in relation to enough's enough. They need to be appreciated, and that needs to be reflected in a salary upgrade, so very much very supportive of that. Obviously, we know, as you mentioned, housing supply strategy is critical. We have too much of a over-reliance on temporary accommodation. So we know the housing supply strategy, it's critical that that's moved forward and adequately resourced. And likewise, we also need to see the stopping of selling off our housing executive stock. That's critical importance. 500 per year is being lost to the stock that we already have. So that's kind of critical. The two questions where I want to focus on, and probably it's Mark yourself, in relation to the wraparound and support services, and you're well aware I've constantly been highlighting the aspect of the Complex Lives project. I see it's simple because it's just about more effective collaborations, putting that time and energy into organisations collaborating, and it's so valuable. So do you think such a model could also be rolled out in the likes of Derry and the Northwest, given the ongoing issues that we have? And then likewise, just secondly, I want to ask about the working relationship you have with other homeless organisations in the south of Ireland, and whether there are similar organisations like yourself that you could coalesce around from an all-Ireland approach. So thank you.
I'll take the first one, and then Nicola will take the second one. Yeah, our view would be that yes, we think that a similar approach to Complex Lives would be a positive approach in Derry, Londonderry. It would be, again, it wouldn't look exactly the same as it does in Belfast. It would need to be developed in the city, and the Housing Executive will be publishing in the not too distant future a street needs audit, which actually gives a very good idea of the difference in what's being seen in Derry, Londonderry and in Belfast. So the committee may wish to see to be aware of that as well. Again, the point I would make though is that in Belfast the council has been central to it. It's been council leadership. They have played a really important coordinating role in Belfast, and they put in resource to make it work. And now again, it's still early days, you know, still a long way to go, but we're already seeing positive outcomes from that. So what I'd be encouraging you to do, Ciara, I know you probably already have done this, but I'd be encouraging all parties to be saying to the council, look, if we really want to address the issues we have to look at how it was done in Belfast and lead on this. Because, I mean, again, you can generate positive outcomes, and the council played a really important role in bringing as a coordinating body around that. So I'll hand over to Nicola for the other part.
Yeah, I mean, and thank you very much, Ciara, for your comments, and certainly passing back to staff as well. It's really good to hear. As we know, homelessness has no borders, you know, so we have people here coming from the south and people who are coming from the north and moving across. And the housing executive have challenges that, just in terms of being able to manage numbers that come across. And I'm not aware that there is a similar body in the south. We have set up meetings with our sister organisations in Scotland, England, Wales, and are now meeting regularly with them. But I know there's great work that happens in the south, and I'd be more than happy to meet with organisations, you know, in the south to see if we can work more closely together. Because again, similarly with training, knows no borders, you know. So a lot of the training we would do is on psychologically informed environments and trauma informed practice. And if there's anything we can provide to support organisations south, vice versa, more than happy to talk about it.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
Chair, thank you. First of all, just checking, would all the main homelessness charities be involved in your group?
Vast majority, yes, would be.
Like
yes.
Simon,
yes.
Shelter,
and Paul and Shelter
Paul,
Northern Ireland,
Simon,
yes.
Salvation Army.
Yes.
That's good. So it's quite a good representative.
Yes,
body.
we would have about 40 members, just under 40 members.
Okay,
yeah.
very good. That's good. And then there's a working together then through yourselves.
Absolutely, yeah. And before I came into post 3 years ago, the sector asked me in on a consultancy basis. I was self-employed to work with the sector during COVID, and we've carried that, working through that very close cooperation, because, you know, we're not here to compete with each other. We're very much here to support each other. So, you know, there's very positive relations within the sector at the minute. Yeah. So I'm pleased to say.
And it's good that you've set out kiosks there for us. Again, as the chair was saying, it's helpful to us as a summary, you know, of your recommendations to us. My experience of working with people experiencing homeless, probably 3 different categories: people who are like the hidden homeless, who they're losing their property, they're losing their private rental, and they've moved in with family members or friends, or surfers, sofa surfing, and so on. And so they're not as visible, but those numbers are increasing. And I would hear that people who are losing property and they don't want to go into a hostel, you know, and but you end up then with putting pressure on other households, and it's certainly not best for children. Secondly, then there's people, they're losing their property and they're moving into emergency accommodation. And in fairness, a lot of those hostel type ones, it's not what people maybe expect it to be. They're worried they're going to be in some sort of big dormitory. You know, tell them that quite often you'll get your own, almost like a flat. You will, you know, you'll have privacy and support services. But there's a range there, including hotels, as you say. And then there's people, the complex lives, people who, including those who are sleeping rough, you know, or longer term, and with various issues in their lives, including addiction issues and a whole range of issues. And I will engage with the City Council. I'd like to hear more. This work has obviously moved on recently.
I'll have to rush you along, Brian.
Yep. So the question I want to ask is about, I also get pushback. There's accommodation in my constituency, which it was Airbnb, and it's now used as emergency accommodation. That happened during COVID, and it's now long term. But I get pushback from residents within the area complaining because if they see behaviour coming from residents which is causing problems in the area, allegations of drug taking and so on. And so in those sorts of situations, are support services, would your member groups be involved in providing support services where, because I know that's happened in a number of situations where either some sort of what was originally tourist type accommodation has been commandeered or been rented out by authorities, by the housing executive, as temporary accommodation. Are support services provided to those centres?
They wouldn't be provided at the same level because they would be in the private sector.
Yeah.
And, you know, during COVID, I know, for example, there would be some in-reach services going in, but I don't have actual facts or figures in terms of, we need to know the location and whether the housing executive had any contracts with some of our members to provide support, but it's just not the same. It needs to be in situ. You know, if you want to have accommodations properly managed, then it needs to be properly managed and not something that's just on an ad hoc basis.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to have to move on. Melissa, very briefly, please.
Nicola, with Mark, Paterov, you're both very welcome. And it's not unlike, say, just what Brian has alluded to. In a rural community in particular, I've listened to this same argument in terms of whenever planning application has gone in to build particular types of, we'll say, flat accommodation, that local neighbours and the likes of it are objecting to it straight away because they're saying, well, what we're going to be confronted with here are all of those homeless people. Now, I'm not talking about someone, we'll say, who are a family that's found themselves homeless as a result of private developers selling their home. I'm talking about those who are at the edge in every respect, and that straight away they identify them as being unwelcome in the community. And my response, and funny,
briefly, please, Melissa.
Yeah, it's the first time I've seen the name of that actual organisation. I think everyone is entitled to a home, irrespective of what, in fact, their social needs are. And I wonder just to what extent do you have an input there in relation to, say, the guidance of organisations and the likes of it in providing accommodation, even in the rural areas and the likes of it.
I would agree with you, and that's one of the first things I did when I came into post was to rebrand us from Council for the Homeless to Homeless Connect, because we need to challenge the narratives around that. I mean, anybody sitting in this room could have experienced homeless at one point. We don't know. We're all people. We're human beings, you know. So I'm always the first to challenge that the language around the homeless, and challenge that stigma. And that's part of the work we do as part of Homeless Awareness Week is to try and challenge that, because particularly now we have so many children who are born into homelessness, and they shouldn't be stuck with that label for the rest of their lives. So we do what we can in the budget that we have, but we work with our partners to try and to challenge the stigma around homelessness and the labelling.
Thank you. Okay, listen, thank you very, very much for the very important work that you do. It's an issue of huge concern to the committee. This is a great start in terms of briefing this committee on the issues, and we will pick up on those. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, members. So moving on then to agenda item 9, which is briefing by Housing Rights. A brief copy of the briefing paper is in your pack at page 205. I'd like to now welcome to the meeting Kate McCauley, who is Chief Executive, Natalie Wheelahan, Head of Policy and Development, and Stephen Morrison, Policy Coordinator. And Kate, I suppose I'd like to go to yourself and ask you to go ahead with a briefing for the members, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to the committee for the introductions and for the invitation to come and brief you. We very much look forward to supporting you in your work over the rest of the mandate. We'd like to start by giving you a brief overview of the work that we do, although I know many of you are no strangers to our services. We'd like to then move back to give some high-level insights in terms of the evidence that our work shows us about the nature of housing problems in Northern Ireland, and then move to finish in this introductory session to highlight 3 overarching policy recommendations. And you'll notice that colleagues that you're hearing from all the housing organisations today are repeating some of the clear messages, and I hope that you see that there's emphatic and uniform view about what needs to be done, and hopefully we can put some energy behind getting it done. So Housing Rights then, who we are and what we do. We've existed, in fact we celebrate a significant birthday this year. It's our 60th anniversary, so for 60 years we have been supporting people across Northern Ireland, helping them with their housing problems and preventing homelessness. And I suppose we do it in 3 or 4 main ways. The first is our bread and butter and what we're best known for, and that's our work to provide direct support through advice, advocacy and representation. And every year we help at least 12,000 households across all of the housing tenures in Northern Ireland through our helpline, casework and legal teams. We also run a housing mediation service to resolve disputes and keep people in their homes. We know that we need to be there for people where they need us and when they need us, so we also run a housing possession court duty scheme, which is a service which exists at the courts in Northern Ireland to assist people who are unrepresented and who are at risk of losing their home through mortgage or rent arrears. And we also work in the 3 Northern Ireland prisons to help people leaving or entering prison custody. The second way that we help is by strengthening the sector. For a long time we have been providing training and legal information services, as well as a dedicated helpline for people who provide advice on housing issues across Northern Ireland. We run a landlord advice service which provides information and advice on the law and good practice and how to comply with that to private landlords. And we also have a community housing advice partnership service excuse me, which supports frontline advisors in 51 different locations across Northern Ireland through training, capacity building and mentoring. The third way that we help is by engaging with people who have direct experience of poor housing and homelessness to develop and deliver services and influence government policy. And I know that members will be very well aware of the work of Renters' Voice, for example, who are a group of private renters who did excellent work in the last phase around the Private Tenancies Act and who campaign for change around the private rented sector. You might be less aware of the work that we do to involve people in the design and delivery of our services. So for a long time we have involved prison peer advisors in the delivery of our advice in the prisons. Historically, we also worked through our minority ethnic communities to build capacity amongst housing champions there so that they could deliver advice within their own communities and refer more complex cases back into ourselves. And we're now working with young people to shape our housing rights for young people service. And I suppose it's the sum total of all of this work that gives us the evidence-based to influence and support the identification of evidence-based informed solutions. And that's why we're here with you today. Turning to the evidence from our work, you won't need me to tell you that the extreme pressure that is facing our housing situation in Northern Ireland with housing supply and temporary accommodation, it will be of no surprise to you at all when I tell you that that is very pronounced in terms of the trends that we see in our advice work. I also wanted to highlight that our work also underlines the equally pressing need for a serious approach to preventing homelessness. So, for example, too many households in Northern Ireland who rent privately need our help. Official statistics record that 17% of households in Northern Ireland rent in the private rented sector. Last year, in the year ending the end of March, 32% of the inquiries that we received came from private renters. That gives you some indication into the disproportionate level of need that private renters face when it comes to housing advice. And you'll see from your packs that the private rented sector is the top issue facing constituents in your constituents in 11 out of 18 constituencies last year. I'd also like to highlight to you that there's been a significant increase in households impacted by mortgage debt who have contacted us for advice. Last year, around 6% of the total inquiries that we received came from people who were in mortgage debt. The previous year, the rate was around 3.5. Thank you, Natalie. We also very much see this in the courts, where we are seeing increasing numbers of people presenting to the courts whose homes are being listed for possession proceedings. The demand now outstrips the service that we are funded to provide there, and we've carried out research to evidence vulnerability in the mortgage market that you might want to ask us to talk a bit more about. Across all tenures, we are seeing that households are having significant issues with affordability and with disrepair. Both these issues are most acute in the private rented sector, but we have seen a notable increase in inquiries around disrepair from the social rented sector. Turning now to the action required, and I promised that I would talk about 3 key issues, so hold me to that. The first is in relation to the programme for government, and it is extremely welcome that the committee will use its position to write to the executive to seek an update around the need for a standalone housing outcome. Housing Rights has been campaigning with the other organisations here today since 2016 on this issue, and despite the New Decade New Approach commitment in this area, we are yet to see it realised. It is incredibly important that this is prioritised, not just so that we can address the huge issues around housing supply and prevention, but also because we understand that by prioritising housing, we will contribute towards improved outcomes in health, justice, economic benefits, and that if we do it well, prioritising housing will be an investment in progress towards other cross-cutting ambitions, our work to become carbon neutral and our work to tackle poverty. So, Housing Rights would like to see housing prioritised in the next programme for government. If we have an outcomes-based programme for government, it should be a standalone housing outcome. If a different methodology is used, the appropriate approach should be made to give housing the priority it requires. We'd also like to see, and perhaps you might consider including this in your request to the executive, we'd like to see a robust methodology which is capable of measuring progress. The indicators or measurements used underneath the housing outcome should reflect the breadth of government's obligations across all tenures, and the process for the development of the programme for government should be an inclusive one. The sector and the communities who are affected by these issues should be involved in the process. The second area that I'd like to mention is around homeless prevention. We believe, like our colleagues in Homeless Connect and the Housing Executive, that there should be a legal duty to prevent homelessness. We know that what gets put into law is what gets done. And if we are serious about making the shift towards prevention, our experience tells us that this is what is required. In fact, we have been calling for such a duty since 2016, and we have done the work to scope the necessary changes that would need to be made to the 1988 housing order to enable this. With legislative developments in England, Wales and now Scotland, which includes such a duty, we believe Northern Ireland is not only lagging behind, but actually that the experience in these other jurisdictions can be helpful to us as we move forward. Part of the thinking back in 2016 was not only that the legislative reform in this area should include a statutory duty to prevent homelessness placed on the Housing Executive, but that it would also place a legal duty on relevant public authorities to act together to prevent and alleviate homelessness. And if we look to the examples in other jurisdictions, we can see that the legal...
I'll have to move you on here,
yes,
we have heard
fine.
some of this in the previous
yes,
presentation.
Just to mention, I know that colleagues have told you about the Housing Scotland bill and the Ask and Act duty there. I suppose Housing Rights would add that one of the significant features about the Scottish legislation that has been brought forward is that it was informed by the Scotland Homelessness Prevention Review Group, which was a group that was set up by the Charity Crisis at the request of the Scottish Government and was chaired by Professor Suzanne Fitzpatrick. We feel that setting up a similar group in Northern Ireland would be a meaningful and practical step that the Department for Communities could do to take effect to move this work forward. And very lastly, the third thing that I'd like to mention is in relation to the just transition, and I know this is an area that the committee is particularly interested in. We feel that there's an opportunity presented by the Northern Ireland Executive's obligations around climate change. You'll remember that I said that the most pressing advice issues that we deal with relate to affordability and to housing conditions, and that these problems are worst for people on low incomes and especially for private tenants. But it's actually for these people, because of varying degrees of home ownership and other complexities, that the route to net zero is less clear. So at Housing Rights, we want to make sure that no one gets left behind, and that's why we have recently commissioned new research, which will include primary research with landlords, with tenants and with low-income homeowners, which seeks to unpick some of these complexities, and we feel this research will be of extreme usefulness to policymakers in this area, and we'd be very happy to come back and talk with the committee when the research has been finalised in September. Thank you for your patience, Colin. We'll now move to questions.
Thank you very much. And I hate rushing on because they are critical issues, and there is a fair amount of overlap between what we're hearing and a very clear picture building, which you're adding to, and that's really, really important. I do also want to just congratulate you, Kate, in your being appointed to your role as Chief Executive Officer. I know you took up post while the executive structures here were still down in 2023, so it's the first time formally within the Assembly structures we've been able to congratulate you in that achievement. And your new role. So I'm going to go straight to members. I'm going to ask members to be really brief and succinct now with questions, 2 or 3 minutes maximum each, please. Go ahead, Ciara.
Try and be brief. So thank you, Kate, Stephen and Natalie. Really, really comprehensive report and some real innovative thinking there as well. Although a lot of the issues have been covered, there's other additional innovative points. And so I've kind of 2 questions. So one of which would be around affordability. In your brief, you mentioned affordability as an issue it's coming through your helpline. And a lot of us in our offices are well aware, particularly those in the private rented sector, but also our homeowners are struggling with their mortgages. Can you give us some of the more examples of the major challenges faced by the various tenures? And I think it's critical, as you mentioned, regarding the programme for government. We need robust methodology, but it needs to be across all tenures. This is not done about one tenure, this is about all tenures. So issues around affordability. And then secondly, particularly the private rented sector, obviously that's been making up a disproportionate amount of calls, 17% private rented sector, 32%. So what do you think of some of the main issues expressed there, and how do you feel they can be addressed, particularly around the private rented sector?
Absolutely. Stephen, do you want to take the question around the private rented sector, and then maybe we can pass over to Natalie to talk about the affordability?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about affordability in the private rented sector, and then Natalie will take it up around homeowners. So renters in private rented sector are facing unprecedented and rapid rent rises. Just to give an example, it's Q3 2021. The average rent in Northern Ireland was around £691, where now it's around £830. So if you break that down, on average, private renters in Northern Ireland are spending an extra £1,668 a year on their rent compared to what they were 2 years ago. And until this month, there's been no increase in support to be able to alleviate that. So that's a massive amount for private renters. The rises can be explained by demand, sort of far outstripping supply. So particularly since the pandemic, if you look at Property Pal's figures, which are presented at the Housing Rights Private Rented Sector Conference, rental stock is actually down 43% compared to pre-pandemic levels, and demand for properties has increased by roughly 500%. Going based off their website, they would have previously received 10 requests per property listing. And now they're receiving an average of 60, and this has been reflected across different statistics as well. So the ONS figures show the rent's been increasing at a faster rate than what it is in any other part of the UK, and the most recent analysis by the University of Ulster specifically highlights lack of stock as a key driver of the recent rent inflation. As agents interviewed as part of the research have actually said. Another key contributor links to impacts presented by a challenging economic climate. At the Housing Rights PRS conference, Property Pal highlighted the falling levels of housing affordability in Northern Ireland as a result of interest rate inflation combined with the cost of living crisis, creating excess demand as far as outstripping supply. So the excess demand without stock to accommodate it only creates rent inflation. So you have on the top end people who would otherwise like to save for a mortgage and move out into home ownership are now blocked from that because the cost of actually moving into the homeowner sector is so steep. And then at the bottom end, you have people who would otherwise be best suited in the social rented sector via a social house, can't get enough points who the actual get allocated house and are forced to remain on in the private rented sector by sort of any means necessary. So there's a lack of people moving out. People are now staying in the private rented sector longer than they would have in previous years, and there hasn't been the stock coming into the private rented sector to be able to facilitate it. So just by way of illustration, 2,800 households presented as homelessness due to loss of private rented accommodation in the past year, which is actually the highest it's been since the financial crash in 2007-2008.
I wonder, Natalie, do you want to come in and do the mortgage sector?
Kate mentioned whenever she was given in the opening brief there that we carried out a bit of research last year around mortgage rates and the impact that was having on homeowners in Northern Ireland. I suppose, as she's highlighted already, people accessing our services, affordability is an issue across all tenures. So rising mortgage interest rates and an increase in the level of our complexity of work around mortgage debt in particular meant that we looked for comprehensive data around the mortgage sector in Northern Ireland and the profile of the Northern Ireland housing market, the housing mortgage market. And as well as that, we wanted to see what was the impact of these 14 consecutive interest rate rises from December 2021 to August 2023 and the numbers affected. And that information isn't publicly available in Northern Ireland. So we commissioned market research to assess the levels of mortgage debt and the impact of this to get a better understanding of the vulnerability of those with mortgages in Northern Ireland and to identify appropriate interventions and to collect some key information on the situation of homeowners in Northern Ireland. The research found not all mortgage holders in Northern Ireland are experiencing the impact of rising interest rates to the same degree. That won't be a surprise, but there are really notable groups of people who display particular vulnerabilities, and they include people with interest only and variable rate mortgages, households with a member with a disability, lower income households, older mortgage holders, those with children and those living in rural areas. I know we're a bit tight for time, but very high level. Interest-only mortgages emerged as a major point of concern. Many borrowers with interest-only mortgages were finding it increasingly difficult to make ends meet as they struggle to cover monthly repayments and save for their capital payment. Almost a third of households with an interest-only mortgage said that their mortgage wasn't affordable, and a quarter said they struggled to make payments in the last year. Variable rate mortgage holders similarly struggling with rising interest rates. 81% had said that they were paying extra than they had been 12 months ago, compared to 28% at a fixed rate. 1/5 of those households reported frequently or always running out of money before payday, and 34% said their mortgage wasn't affordable. Lower income households more likely than higher income households to be on variable rate or interest only mortgages, and therefore exposed to the financial shock of the interest rate rises. Over a quarter of lower income households said they were finding it difficult on their current income, and 29% said their mortgage wasn't affordable, with over a quarter saying they'd struggled to pay their mortgage in the last year. Another really critical issue here is families with households with a member with a disability. So we know that those with disabilities often face additional expenses in relation to healthcare, accessibility and other essential needs. The rising mortgage crisis placed a really heavy burden, and that came through very clearly in our research. Over half of households with someone with a disability said they were paying more than they were paying last year on their mortgage. 25%, so a quarter of households with a disability said their mortgage wasn't affordable, and half had to borrow money in the last year to make ends meet. Older mortgage holders too came up as particularly vulnerable. That's those aged over 45. You'll be disappointed to hear that we're classed as older mortgage holders, but 18%, that was the group that was most likely to say that they frequently ran out of money before payday. And 1/5 of those aged over 35 and 45 and over said that their mortgage wasn't affordable. So we made a number of recommendations on the back of that research. The first one being that we would like to see the reinstatement of support for mortgage interest as a non-repayable grant, which could be accessed after 13 weeks. We would also like to see that increased in line with current interest rates. We would also like the Executive to explore the introduction of a mortgage rescue scheme as exists in other parts of the UK to enable homeowners who face repossession to stay in their homes either as part owners or as tenants. The very vulnerable groups of the research identified, so people with disabilities, older people, lower incomes, dependents and those living in rural areas, there must be financial support made available to those groups. We have to ensure that those groups are prevented from losing their homes. So that absolutely needs to be looked at. Organisations like ourselves that offer services for, as Kate mentioned, our HPCDS, our Housing Court Dispossession Scheme, need to be fully resourced and equipped to ensure that people can access justice when they need it. The issue about rising numbers of cases and repossession cases in court mean that people absolutely have to have access to justice. And the final one is around data. It's a shocking situation where we had to commission research in order to access data to know where we stood in Northern Ireland in terms of the vulnerability and the resilience of our mortgage situation here. So we would like to see the Department for Communities considering how appropriate data on mortgages and vulnerability in the market, particularly in relation to levels of mortgage debt, can be gathered, published and analysed. That will involve but won't be restricted to engagement with UK Finance and the Financial Conduct Authority.
Thank you. Some very worrying figures there. I think in brief we need to take that report and write to the various strands of that to ask for updates on the various strands of that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead to Kelly, please, I think. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, folks. I know that we've had other representatives today that have answered a few questions, but there's one that strikes that we haven't really come across so far. You talked in your presentation about the number of people moving from private rental, obviously looking for social rental. We're very aware in this committee, because we've had updates from the department and from the Housing Executive, that there's over 30% lack of staffing within that support team that helps people who are coming out of the rented sector forward. Are you actually having to take up the slack then of a lot of advice and support for those people? Because I'm aware of, for instance, a number of constituents who have made that approach, and then the team, because it doesn't have enough staff available, they've maybe gone there 4 or 5 months in advance of eviction, and 28 days out they're still not getting help. I'm just wondering if you're being inundated with those people.
For sure, where there's pressure in other areas, we see it in our work as well. I think our advice team and the people who man our helpline would say that it often leads to people being, as you would expect, increasingly frustrated when they're calling us. Often they're calling us after having made repeated attempts to get through to the relevant other authorities. It means as well that if people are having difficulty getting through, it also is difficult for some of our staff to get through and to actually progress cases. So it leads to frustration across the board. It's not. I think we should be proactively And that's, I suppose, one of the very practical reasons why we think it's necessary to legislate in this area around prevention, because unless we do that, you'll repeatedly encounter a scenario where people prioritise their statutory duties. They naturally prioritise their time, people and resource in those areas, and the focus then drifts away from prevention, even though it's what everyone wants to do. So I suppose that's why we feel that's so necessary, Kelly.
Thank you.
Sorry, it was just very quickly, that legal duty to prevent homelessness, have you brought that up with the Minister, and has there been any response on that?
Not to the current Minister, not yet. We have included it in our first day brief with him, and we look forward to briefing him and Minister and talking with him about it. We have raised it with the Department. A number of organisations have raised it with the Department through the interdepartmental group which exists to oversee the homeless strategy. And I suppose now that we have an assembly, now that there's an opportunity for us to progress this work.
Thank you.
Ellie?
Thank you.
Daniel, finally.
Thank you very much, Chair, and congratulations, Kate, on your appointment, and thank you for that very detailed presentation. Just in relation to the numbers of people that are facing affordability challenges, are you finding a larger percentage of working families that are directly affected, both in the private rented sector as a consequence of the rising rents, but equally, obviously, in terms of increased mortgage rates?
Absolutely. I think, as Natalie says, one of the key groups who are very vulnerable around in the mortgage sector is people who have children in the home. So it's absolutely families. We know that the demographic of people who live in the private rented sector has changed over the years. There are more and more people, more and more families who now live there because they can't access other housing tenures. And absolutely the issues that they face around affordability, but also the issues they face around lack of other housing options and lack of choice. So when a notice to quit is served, they have to consider issues like proximity to schools and to childcare and family support. All of the issues that have been raised here today. So yes, absolutely, we see quite a lot of working families contact us.
And just specifically, what would a mortgage rescue scheme for Northern Ireland look like?
Well, I suppose there's lots of different options in terms of mortgage rescue schemes. There's one that operates, there's a number of schemes, but the one that we would sort of have been looking at is a scheme that operates in Scotland. So the Scottish Government runs a scheme, and it works in two ways, so that homeowners who are facing repossession can look to see whether they can get a secured loan from the government. If they meet the entitlement requirements, they can access a secured loan in one of two ways, and that allows them to either become a shared owner on the property and stay there in shared ownership with the government, or to become a tenant and to remain in the house, and that then the secured loan is taken on their asset, which is the house. I mean, these are not ideal situations. We would like to hope that people would be able to meet the cost of their housing, but unfortunately that's not what we're seeing. And people are facing repossession, and we want to ensure that everybody can keep the roof over their heads. And certainly the work that we're doing, what we're seeing coming through our helpline, and what we're seeing in the research that we're doing, would speak very clearly and strongly to us that something needs to be done to ensure that people feel safe in their homes, and that everybody has the right to a home, safe and stable. So.
Thank you.
Okay, listen, thank you. Huge areas of concern, but hugely grateful to you for bringing them to us, and for very neatly tying up some of the other strands we've talked about earlier. So Kate, Natalie and Stephen, thank you for attending today, and it's much appreciated, the information that you've shared with us. Thank you, members. Thank you. Members, if I can just track back onto the previous session, there'd been a suggestion that we write to the Housing Executive for Progress and Housing First. Have you that noted, Clerk? I think that's something that we should actually pick up on. Ask the Housing Executive for, and there was also an indication that maybe we would look at the legislative issues that are going on around Scotland, where we are legislatively via RAISE. So maybe I think that's something, if members are content, that we will progress. I think we need to get a bit of a handle on this.
Could we even ask as well, just out of the last session there, that legal duty to prevent homelessness, what's happening in Scotland, and is the Minister thinking about anything in his, I know he's sort of mentioned his forward legislative programme doesn't really include anything like that, but there's 3 years still to go.
Yeah.
And what about consideration for this? I think it is pertinent, this homeless prevention review group, because it is a big prevention, and if we are going to look at the statutory duty and stuff, is there
As the Minister?
Yeah.
That could actually work very neatly into the delivery of the legislation then. Yeah.
Members content with that?
Agreed.
Yep. Okay, thanks members. Moving on then to our final briefing, and I will just flag we have a significant number of SRs to deal with today as well, so we do need to keep the focus on time, unfortunately, but I'm now delighted to take on board a briefing by the Chartered Institute of Housing. A copy of the briefing paper from the Institute is available at 214, and now I'd like to welcome Ms Carol McTaggart, who is Chair of the Institute of Housing, Chartered Institute, and Justin Cartwright, who is the National Director. Justin, I think it's yourself going to make maybe a brief opening statement, if you can make that as brief as possible so we can get to members' questions.
Absolutely. Just very quickly a bit about us. So we were founded in 1918 by women who worked under Octavia Hill in Marylebone in London, and she was a professional landlord and also co-founder of the National Trust. So what she was all about was professional housing management, good quality housing and access to green spaces. And that's really what runs through our blood today. So we're a professional body. We have individual members, about 18,000 members worldwide, about 550 who work in Northern Ireland, about 80% of whom work for the housing associations and the housing executive. So we exist to help them be as good as they can in their jobs. And we do that through things like access to member services, so things like access to information, professional development tools, events, networking opportunities. We also offer education services, so we deliver training, our own qualifications, so we're our own awarding organisation and housing academy, and then we do policy development work as well in the public interest. So just to start off before I hand over to Carol, just conscious that we work really well with colleagues in the room, and you'll have heard that we're singing from the same song sheet, so we'll try to not to duplicate too much. So just something I wanted to mention briefly that hasn't been discussed this morning, and that's the real need to progress the revitalisation of the housing executive. So the Northern Ireland water issue is something that's going to be forefront of members' minds, but the housing executive is in a very similar position, where as a public corporation, it has 83,000 homes, which are also assets that can be borrowed against. It has significant rental income streams, and yet in spite of that, it can't borrow to reinvest in its homes. And because it has homes that are typically older, homes that were built by the Housing Trust and the old local authorities, they do tend to be built to a lower standard and require significantly higher levels of investment to bring them up to the decent home standard. So there's 4 ways in the main that problem can be addressed, because we're about bringing solutions to the table, not just problems. So one thing that you could do is for HM Treasury to change the way that it classifies public debt. So the UK uses a tool called the General Gross Government Debt or something like that, which counts public corporation debt on the public balance sheet. That's unusual because it's not the way that the likes of the IMF, the European Commission, the European Union classify public debt. So if they change the way that they classify debt, then that would help to alleviate pressure on organisations like the Housing Executive, like to an extent Northern Ireland Water, albeit that it doesn't have a revenue stream without water charging. The other thing that you could do is you could seek a special dispensation from HM Treasury to allow it to borrow, which is the focus of current conversations. Thirdly, you could change the governance structure of the Housing Executive to make it like a mutual cooperative housing association type of model that would take it off the public books. And then finally, you could look at some kind of stock transfer arrangement where you move the Housing Executive homes to housing associations to enable them to invest. And different elements of all 4 of those options, I guess, has been danced around for the last 10 plus years. And our concern would be that, during that time, housing conditions for tenants have only worsened, particularly considering the investment requirements for net zero as well, because all this is not taking into account yet the extra amount that would be needed for investment for net zero. So we would encourage progress on that specifically. And that said, I'll hand over to Carol to raise a few other key points that we have.
Thanks, Justin, and thanks, Chair and members. And I am conscious of your time, so maybe rather than repeat what others have said, maybe if I could just summarise what we see as key asks. I suppose as a membership organisation, we are hearing directly from individuals who work in the housing sector but we also hear from their organisations that they work for and that they support. And what we also hear is how difficult, and you've heard this across today, how difficult a job it is to work in housing. And it's not just a house, it's about the support services that people who work in housing provide. And what we want to encourage, and we are, Chartered Institute of Housing is a trusted partner of government, whereby they look to our organisation to sense check, to work with, to advise on policy. And a number of the things that we currently are articulating is around having regard to the inextricable link between housing, health and education, and ensuring that housing is more than bricks and mortar, and how we can support people to live well and flourish and be part of sustainable communities. And with that in mind, there are a number of things that we would like the committee to hear and hopefully that you could take forward. I suppose with that in mind is the standalone outcome for the programme for government. If that is enshrined in that programme for government, that will lead to the commitment in the housing supply strategy. Before the previous minister vacated her office, the housing supply strategy was in draft, and it was a firm commitment across government to deliver 100,000 new homes in Northern Ireland, and of which 15,000 of those would be for social housing. What a great way to try to help Northern Ireland with its population of 1.9 million in terms of trying to have in their sites access to a safe and decent home. We've already heard today around 46,000 people are on the waiting list for a social home. And one of the previous speakers, Seamus, at the Federation of Housing Associations, talked about the need for 2,200 new homes. Last year, the housing sector was only given grant funded that enabled them to deliver just under 1,500. And we are very concerned that the budget for 24-25 will reduce that even further down to 1,200. That would be a reduction of around 1,000 homes at a time when our waiting lists in Northern Ireland are the highest that they've been in 10 years. And I suppose then that also talks to the condition of the homes we live in. We've all seen, we've looked across in GB about tragic cases in Grenville in relation to the fire, and we've looked at how our housing conditions can impact how we live. And we've had the tragic case of a death of a toddler in Rochdale around damp and mould. So therefore that talks to the condition of the homes we build. And we're very really getting behind the condition of the homes. And the two asks, and it talks to both decarbonisation, but also what we continue to build. Because we are all accepting that we have a housing stock in Northern Ireland that we will have to retrofit. But what we don't want is the new homes that we build, that we'll have to come back and retrofit those as well. So is there a real opportunity for the department to look at the standards that existing and new housing is being built to? And should there be, and we would argue that our new homes should be built to SAP rating A at least, with the appropriate grant funding mechanism to support that. We also would support public subsidy intervention in relation to decarbonisation. And we have talked today incessantly about the challenges, particularly around Northern Ireland water. But there's also a significant challenge with the grid. And if we're serious about decarbonisation and electrification necessary to achieve that, there is a significant undersupply in the grid in Northern Ireland, and we will absolutely have to look at that in terms of how we can advance at scale decarbonisation. And then the third aspect of that, Chair, is also around the housing association sector has 60,000 homes, the housing executive has 80,000 homes. There is a real opportunity for collaboration around all of social housing providers to come together, perhaps working with organisations like the Construction Industry Training Board in terms of looking how we can upskill our young people, particularly who want to come into the construction industry, to look at modern methods of construction and to see how Northern Ireland could be a leading light in terms of entrepreneurial route that would also address the capacity in the Northern Ireland grid and help us with pace and scale to be able to decarbonise our homes. And maybe my final point, conscious of time, is back to what we're here for, and we want to build sustainable communities. And sustainable communities talks about our outreach work, our community development work, our funding through supporting people, but it also talks to the review of the allocation system. and about making sure we're not bringing everybody in with similar complex needs into the one environment, because that's going to take much longer to try to create a sustainable community. And what we want to do is to see a review of the housing selection scheme that actually supports people to live well. And maybe if I could pick up a point you specifically raised earlier, Chair, in relation to occupational therapists and adaptations to homes, there is also perhaps an ask that this committee could take back to the Department for Communities, because currently, whilst new homes are built to lifetime home standards, which has the concept of cradle to the grave, and therefore where our tenants require adaptations, they're easier to be made. But on occasions, those adaptations cannot be made without the recommendation from an occupational therapist. And there isn't enough occupational therapists in the health system to come forward, and indeed my own organisation, in my day job, I've had a tenant who has had to wait 18 months to get a recommendation for a stair lift. And is there an opportunity that the department could look at housing associations and the housing executive coming together, employing their own occupational therapists, and then letting us get access to the Disability Access Grant to be able to do that at pace, and allow somebody like that individual I've just shared, instead of having to live downstairs and sleep downstairs, the impact that stair lift had, and instead of waiting 18 months, if they're waiting 8 days or 8 weeks, the impact to their quality of life, and they're certainly living better and living well. So I hope we could, I'm sorry, we've tried to give a rough, I'm very conscious of time.
Yeah, and appreciate it, and some very important additional elements added in there, which is going to be very useful to the committee, and this is going to require some pulling together around the strands. So I'm going to go straight to members then. Daniel, Kelly, Ciara and Brian. Wrap it as you can, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Carol and Justin, for that presentation, and for some of the very welcome suggestions that are very interesting in there, and we can all relate to them, particularly around the occupational therapist. 18 months is exactly what I wrote down before you had even said it. And just this week, we were told 18 months for somebody to come out to put a stair lift on, so I can relate directly to what you're saying. The person ended up wanting to go private because it's an immediate need issue, and that's at a direct cost to that vulnerable adult in question. Just in relation to a thing you'd raised, I've written it down there, you have concerns, in your opinion, that there might only be 1,200 homes built next year. Where's that figure coming out of?
Well, it's not an official figure. I suppose it's our discussions with our elected representatives, the officials, and trying to get clarity on what the budget for 24-25 delivery of new homes might be. And I suppose we are fearful, with having had an understanding that Northern Ireland needs at least 2,200 to make any sense of inroads into that 46,000. Any further cuts, we've already had a 600 home reduction in 23-24. If there's any, and I suppose what we're trying to do is we're sensing the challenges at a fiscal level for Northern Ireland, and if there is no additional money, what we're hearing is it's likely to be a challenge on the capital budget. And I suppose our concern is to go from what's needed of 2,200, if it goes down even further from what we got this year, to 1,200, all of what we've talked about today will just be exacerbated. And we're really calling to protect the funding that's necessary to enable the housing sector in Northern Ireland to deliver 2,200 homes at least.
I absolutely agree with you, and one of my main frustrations with how this place operates is that it takes a figure, recognises that there's a need, and then underscores it, and then cuts it the following year, instead of actually prioritising the fundamental problem that is here to address it in the interests of the people that are in dire need. And that is an issue, and it is a challenge, but it's an issue for this executive. It needs to be more ambitious in the interests of people to ensure that their interests are met and served, particularly with something as critical and as fundamental as the provision of a home. And that is something that you've made very, very clearly in what you've said. Apart from finance, what do you see as the greatest barriers to providing the new homes that we need?
So again, I'll not repeat what Seamus said earlier and what others have done, but in the main at the moment, we urgently need the implementation of the recommendations from the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce report on the review of the planning system. We need absolutely there needs to be a revitalisation of Northern Ireland water, because without drains and there will be no cranes, and therefore we will get planning approvals, but we will not be able to connect to water services, and therefore we will not be able to move families who've been waiting on that waiting list for a long time and to make their homes. But I equally would have to say, if we are serious, we are serious with the Climate Act and Northern Ireland looking at its new energy strategy, we have to, 2/3 of the homes in Northern Ireland are still heated by oil. Yeah. And so therefore, if we are going to do something a bit different, and we are going to look at electrification in a way to try to move to decarbonisation, we absolutely have to look at the grid as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Kelly?
I'll be very quick, Chair. When you talked earlier about the revitalisation of the Housing Executive, Justin, you talked about change ways to categorise public debt. Do you have a paper or anything on those sort of options that we could consider?
Draft one for the committee's
Would you mind
consideration.
sending that into the committee? That would be really helpful. The other thing I wanted to ask you is, my other concern about the Housing Executive, the revitalisation, we're going to have a landlord coming into the sector with over 80,000 homes, that some of them are in bad repair. Have you had any look at what the impact to the market will be of that size of a landlord coming in a different type of way?
We have had some deliberations about it. I think a key concern for the sector is, we've heard a lot about it today in terms of availability of jobs and skills, and there has been, it's a small market, and there has been a tendency for staff to move amongst housing associations, for instance. So if you have, for instance, an active developing arm within the Housing Executive, then availability of staff would have to be a consideration as part of that.
I'm just wondering about the Monopolies Commission and if there's anything there. It's a huge new active social landlord coming in. Yeah.
Could I add to that, Kelly? I suppose there's also an opportunity. I think also we collaborate across the housing sector, and I think it's a real opportunity with the scale of the sector across both the Housing Executive and the housing associations to really share the knowledge and expertise that we have. And on occasions, it's not necessarily staff moving from one housing part of the organisation to another. Are there other ways perhaps we could provide those services in a collaborative way rather than just taking in-house dedicated staff all the time? So is there a better way that we could do that as a housing sector that actually gets the better value? Because we represent the people who work in this sector, and it is a really tough job, and our housing officers are out in the ground. They're counsellors, they're social workers, they're police enforcers in terms of antisocial behaviour. They need strong leadership and they need our support behind them.
Thank you. I'm going to have to. I fully agree. Actually, I'm very impressed with the sector that we have and the advice coming out. And I'm also impressed the fact that a large number of the organisations have stayed on throughout the entire briefings, which is really encouraging. Ciara?
I know we're tight for time, so thank you very much. Really, really appreciate it. And I think outlining your paper, I think we would all fully endorse and agree. Relatively short mandate. And I know from a higher level, medium-term objectives regarding NI water, infrastructure, etc., and I know they have been raised and highlighted in the Assembly, and we will all continue to raise it to ensure that happens. But in the short term, over the next 3 years, what would you say would be critically important to support our people at this moment in time? Particularly, and I know we don't need to go across all tenures because there's probably top priorities, and we have had some, but even within your tenants, within the housing associations and your tenants currently?
Well,
do you know what? If I can, you did give a fair amount of it. I think it would be great to get that back in writing. Actually,
I know you mentioned obviously
because
the
there
OTs.
is some real detail in there that would be useful.
I can do that, Chair.
Yeah. So if we get that back in writing, I think that'll be really useful going forward.
Just quickly to take the opportunity to reinforce what partners have said this morning, so standalone housing outcome, because I think that will drive strategy. It will also drive funding. Others will be better informed about this, but we're supportive of a legislative duty to prevent homelessness as well, because in places where that's been in place, it's evidenced person-centred outcomes, even where you don't have the resources, because it's a sit-down conversation to people to define exactly what kind of support and wraparound services they need to help them sustain their tenancy.
Chair, can I say two last things then? I suppose, because again, I heard this morning around empty homes. And the Department for Communities did have an empty home strategy, and indeed my own organisation, my day job, was able to access financial transactions capital through the Department for Communities to purchase empty homes and bring them back into use. And perhaps there's an opportunity, and I know the department is looking at the evaluation of that at the moment, and is there an opportunity to advance that at pace and see if financial transactions capital could continue to be used and made available to the sector in terms of bringing empty homes, because there's another way to bring additional properties back into use, and particularly with the changing nature of our towns and city centres and the changing nature of the retail offer, there are existing buildings that are causing blight, and it would be a real opportunity to bring those back. And maybe my last thing is, hopefully, because we've all come today with a lot of asks, what I would like to finish on with is, I hope, a bit of positivity. How much the housing sector is open for business, how much the housing sector wants to work in partnership with you, our elected representatives, and wider partners. We are absolutely committed to delivering homes and services. We want the people of Northern Ireland to live well. We want them to be part of a good society. And you know, we're all proud to work and live in Northern Ireland, and we really want to be your trusted partner, and we want to do and work collaboratively with you.
Thank you. I agree with all of that. Brian?
As quickly as I can, Chair, and thank you, Carol, for mentioning that about empty homes. I'd be interested to hear more about that initiative if you're able to send me some details, because it's an issue I'll continue to highlight. I should perhaps have asked this of some of the other bodies who presented today, maybe the Federation of Housing Associations, but I heard what you said earlier about housing association homes might need retrofitting in the future, but in my experience, they are a higher standard, you know, and I think that standard's very high, quite often higher than private sector building, you know. But my question is there any other option for house building that we should be looking at? When you visit other cities, there's more high-rise, you know, and traditionally people like to have their own front door, and of course that's desirable. But a lot of cities you would visit, there's more people living in higher rise, developments. I don't know if there's a saving. I know the housing executive don't like the tower blocks now, and say they're costly. But is there a genuine saving there? You know, that you could deliver more properties for the same value in terms of trying to accommodate more people. I also hear sometimes about these. I'm not convinced, but these sort of click together houses, or you know, the prefab ones that you build in a factory and you bring them on site, and they. I don't exaggerate how easy that is, but you know, they fit together. And it's supposed to be a cheaper model. I don't know what the standard of the house is like, but are these models worth looking at, or is there any investigation that you're aware of into other models which could deliver more quality homes or accommodation for a lesser value and therefore for more people?
So I suppose it depends how we define lesser value.
Yeah,
but
lesser cost.
Yeah, so there's certainly models both throughout GB, but also in some European cities. And if you look at, for example, Vienna is very much around, and if you look at any successful city, one of the top 10 indicators include people living in the city. And it includes people with all tenures and all client groups. But it's also very important that our city centres stay shared. And therefore, how could we, and if you just look, I walked through Belfast City Centre last night too, you know, is there a real opportunity to reuse our existing buildings and bring people back living into our cities rather than greenfield sites? But there will have to be a refreshed approach from a planning point of view to make that happen. If we are going to bring existing buildings back to use, should there be an incentivisation to brownfield regeneration rather than greenfield sites? And I suppose the other thing is there are a number of what's called modern methods of construction, which is a bit more technical in the prefab. Yes. And indeed, there's been a lot of investigative studies done, both in terms of how it's worked well and where it hasn't worked well. And I think, back to the point I made earlier, the construction industry in Northern Ireland is quite traditional. And also we will have a skills shortage in the construction industry in the not too distant future if you look at the age profile. Is there a real opportunity for Northern Ireland PLC to really look at an opportunity as to how we revitalise our construction industry in terms of how we build homes? including modern methods of construction, high energy efficiency, but also there will have to be a review about tall buildings, because I do think there is, and particularly when we go out to build new homes, there is an ask of 2-storey houses, front and back garden. On occasions that also doesn't fit with planning policy, because planning policy in city centres want key feature buildings and they want tall buildings, and so there's a tension. So it's how, if we are going to build apartments or if we are going to build other forms, there's an education piece around what does that mean, but we also have to ensure that our public realm and our open spaces add back the quality if we're going to do something a wee bit different.
Just to add to that, absolutely there's a need to challenge thinking around density. There's a really interesting report that I'll share with the committee as well a few years ago in Europe that kind of looked at the social implications of more dense developments, and it generally found that if you have a development with around 15 households, that tends to be the tipping point where beyond that those social connections start to break down. Maybe you don't know all your neighbours, there's more of an outplay of antisocial behaviour and things like that. But absolutely density has to be looked at, because there's examples that we can cite where parcels of land come up, you put forward a proposal for a new development, and there's opposition from the community to say against the advice that's been given by professional planners. This is too dense. So then the response to that is, well, let's reduce the density. And what you're doing by doing that is there are fewer homes on the ground for the people that need them. So I think we do need to be more ambitious around that.
Yeah. Listen, we could continue on. Really, really high quality of advice and knowledge shared with the committee today. I think that's going to be very, very useful for us moving forward, given that we are in a short mandate. But I thank both of yourselves for that this morning. Clerk, I think there's been a number of very significant kind of overlap in terms of points raised. I think it'd be useful if we get a report back for the committee on the key points raised, the actions that we have agreed today, and maybe any future potential actions, because I think there's very strong element of the advice to the department emerging from today's session. It's very important advice given the crisis that is out there, and I think if we can pull this all together in a cohesive way, we can provide a very useful piece, share with the department as a recommendation. Go ahead, Kelly.
Could we maybe put it on our forward work plan for when we're having our away day, an inquiry into this maybe?
That has occurred to me as well. I think that is something that we maybe should be, because just to keep those strands together. Listen, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, members, I'm going to have to move then on to the next item. So agenda item 11, SR 2024/58, the benefit cap annual limit amendment regulations NI 2024, which are on page 220. Have members any objection to this rule?
No.
No, thank you. Members, therefore, can I put the following question, that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024/58, the benefit cap annual limit amendment regulations NI 2024, and recommends that it is approved by the Assembly. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 12, SR 2024/69, Social Security 2023 Benefits Operating Order, NI 2024, which is on page 229. Members, any objection to the rule?
Nope.
No.
Can I therefore put the question that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024/69, the Social Security 2023 Benefits Operating Order, NI 2024, and recommends that it is approved by the Assembly? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 13, SR 2024/70, the mesothelioma lump sum payments 2023, conditions and amounts, amendment regulations NI 2024 on page 268. Have members any objection?
Nope.
No.
Are members therefore content that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024/70, the mesothelioma lump sum payments 2023, conditions and amounts, amendment regulations NI 2024, and recommends that it is approved by the Assembly? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Item 14, SR 2024/71, the Social Security 2023 Benefits Operating Regulations on page 297. Have members any objection to this rule?
No.
No.
So therefore, can I put the question that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024/71, the Social Security 2023 Benefits Operating Regulations NI 2024, and recommends that it is approved by the Assembly? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Item 15, SR 2024/73, the Social Security Benefits Operating Order NI 2024, page 308. Any objection, members, to this rule?
No.
Therefore, can I put the question that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024-73, the Social Security Benefits Operating Order NI 2024, and recommends it's approved by the Assembly? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Agenda item 16, SR 2024/74, Occupational Pension Schemes, Governance and Registration Amendment Regulations on page 368. Have members any objection to this rule?
No.
And therefore asked that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024-74, Occupational Pension Schemes, Governance and Registration Amendment Regulations NI 2024, and recommends that it is approved by the Assembly. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Agenda item 17, SR 2024-75, Mesothelioma, Lump Sum Payments, Conditions and Amounts Amendment Regulations 2024, page 418. Have members any objection to this rule?
No.
Therefore, can I ask that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024-75, the Mesothelioma, Lump Sum Payments, Conditions and Amounts Amendment Regulations NI 2024, and recommends that it is approved by the Assembly? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Agenda item 18, SR 2024/76, the Social Security Benefits Operating Regulations NI 2024, on page 429. Have members any objection?
No.
Therefore, can I ask that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024-76, the Social Security Benefits Operating Regulations NI 2024, and recommends that it's approved by the Assembly? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Item 19, SR 2024-78, the Occupational Pension Schemes Master Trusts Regulations NI 2024, page 439. Have members any objection?
No.
Therefore, can I ask that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024-78, the Occupational Pension Schemes Master Trust Regulations NI 2024, and recommends that it's approved by the Assembly? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Item 20, SR 2024-79, the Occupational Pension Schemes Administration, Investment, Charges and Governance Amendment Regulations 2024, on page 490. Have members any objection to this rule?
No.
Therefore, can I ask that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024-79, the Occupational Pension Schemes Administration, Investment, Charges and Governance Amendment Regulations NI 2024, and recommends that it is approved by the Assembly? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Agenda item 21, members, final of these. 2024/90, the Occupational Pension Schemes Funding and Investment Strategy and Amendment Regulations NI 2024, which are on page 525 of your pack. Have members any objection to this rule?
No.
Therefore, can I ask that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024/90, the Occupational Pension Schemes Funding and Investment Strategy and Amendment Regulations NI 2024, and recommends that it's approved by the Assembly? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 22, members, is our forward work programme, a copy of which is at page 597 of your pack. At our next meeting, members on the 18th of April, we will receive a ministerial briefing, as well as briefings from the Construction Employers Federation, co-ownership, and a further module from RAISE on public finance scrutiny. Any comments, members, or are you content to note the forward work programme?
Content.
Thank you. Item 23, members, any other business? Ian Groella. And will Ian Groella be? Does anybody have any other business? Brian?
Just to say, earlier on when we did the correspondence, I think you said, maybe we should leave that till after, but I think it's important that the correspondence is done at the start of the meeting. Otherwise, we'd have a situation, you're trying to do it now when members are already leaving. So my preference would be, because sometimes there are important matters, arising under correspondence. So rather than leave it till the end of the meeting, I prefer it's kept, where it is earlier.
Well, okay, we had agreed earlier that we were going to do that, so I prefer to bring it back to I'm conscious now a number of people have left. We would be that 10 minutes further forward in the meeting, I have to say, so it's a question for members to decide on, and we can discuss that again next week. I'm quite happy to come back to it, but for now we have made that decision, but quite happy to come back to it again as an item for AOB. Any other business, members? Agenda item then 24 is date, time and location of our next meeting, and the next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday 18th of April 2024 in room 29 here in Parliament Buildings. So this meeting is now adjourned, and if I could ask the clerk to take us out of public session.
Committee Room 29, sound.